members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? And I call the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In a year plagued with cost of living issues, persistent inflation and decade-high energy bills, our community in Fowler continues to move forward even though this government continuously forget us. Our community in Fowler is one of the most multiculturally diverse electorates in the country, with 67% of speaking a language other than English and at home, and 54.7% having been born overseas, many of whom have come to Australia with the aim of providing for their families with greater opportunities and better access to education. To the many students in Fowler, December 18th is a day that will officially represent the conclusion of your high school journey. Whilst many will go on to university, it's also important to consider the many students who will pursue different pathways, such as vocational training in manufacturing and construction industries. Having gone through the pressures of high school exams and transitioning to university myself, I want to wish all students in Fowler and across the state the best of luck with their exam results, and leave you all with a short message. Your results do not define who you are and what you will go on to achieve. Whatever the outcome is on the 18th, don't be disheartened and continue to do your best. Continuing on the theme of the role of education plays in Fowler, November saw the 50th anniversary of the Diklat Assyrian School. The school has been a long-standing pillar in the Assyrian Australian community, providing assistance and education to students over the course of 50 years. It was an honour to be part of the celebration, seeing past and present teachers who've dedicated themselves to preserving and growing the Assyrian language and culture. I'd like to thank Dr. Ben Dawood, President of the Assyrian Australian Association, for including me in this significant celebration, and I wish him all the best in the future endeavours. Further highlighting the diverse communities that reside in Fowler electorate, I joined the celebrations of the Iraqi community. It was an honour to come together and celebrate the Iraqi cultures, traditions and peoples. I'm continuously proud of our amazing community. Thank you to late Al Aboudi for reaching out to my office and including me in this celebration. In my community of Fowler, Christmas lights have started to twinkle and take shapes across many homes, and I'm sure many members are starting to hear All I Want for Christmas theme playing in the stores. In what has been a challenging year for many residents of Fowler, Christmas is an opportunity for families to come together and celebrate togetherness. For many, the ongoing cost of living crisis will make Christmas a tough time of the year. You're not alone. For the many Christians in Fowler, Christmas is a time to celebrate the gift of the Christ child. It is important to remember that the Christmas period is not the gifts we may or may not receive, but rather cherishing times with our loved ones whilst reflecting on the year that has passed. I would like to wish all my constituents in Fowler a very Merry Christmas, and extend a very Merry Christmas to my fellow parliamentarian staff and their constituents across the country. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I call the Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, the Albanese government's #1 priority is taking pressure off households and helping people in Melbourne's West with the cost of living. Over the last 2 years, we've already delivered tax cuts for every Australian, provided $300 energy bill relief to every household, revived bulk billing and saved Australians $1 billion through cheaper medicines. Next year, we're committed to go further. A re-elected Labor government will cut student debt by 20%. That's 20% for everyone with a HECS debt, Australia-wide. This will be additional cost of living relief for the 3 million Australians with student debt, including over 21,000 people in our community in Melbourne's West. Our changes will put $680 a year back in the pocket of the average graduate with a HECS debt and cut $5,500 off the average debt. Labor wants Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn, and to reduce the debt they owe. These changes don't just help young people considering study or those currently at university. They help anyone with a HECS debt, regardless of when they last studied. The impacts are tangible and mean more money in the pockets of more people in Melbourne's West. Labor will also raise the repayment threshold and lower the rate of repayments, because you shouldn't have to start paying off your student debt until you're earning a decent wage. This plan to slash student debt will work alongside other Labor measures to help make housing affordable for working people. We know home loan lenders can take student debt into account when determining how much that they can borrow, and this can hold people back from buying a home. By reducing existing debt levels and repayments, we're improving the ability of young Australians to save and to break into the housing market. The Albanese government's plan is about pragmatic change to take pressure off households in Melbourne's West and remove barriers to home ownership. These HECS changes sit alongside our $32 billion Homes for Australia plan. This includes build-to-rent accommodation, and in addition, our home guarantee scheme will support people from Melbourne's West to buy a home with a smaller deposit. Labor is also locking in fee-free TAFE, something we know well in Victoria, and making it permanent right across Australia to deliver the skilled workforce and well-paid jobs of the future. More tradies and construction workers to build more homes. More nurses and healthcare workers to care for our loved ones in our community. More tech engineers to support a modern Australia, to build a modern Australia. More opportunities for Melbourne's West to gain the skills to get ahead and to find a secure, well-paid job. Labor's changes are about putting intergenerational equity and fairness back into the system. It's about education, unlocking economic opportunity. It's about giving people a fair go. This is what Labor governments do, helping people under pressure while also building Australia's future. The Albanese Labor government's about ensuring that no one is held back and no one is left behind, and our student debt reforms are delivering on this promise.
Well, the member for Wanham.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to talk about the impact that the perilous state of the Victorian State Labor government's finances is having on Western Victoria. And it is a telltale lesson as to why governments have to be able to manage money, because if they can't, then the sad reality is it impacts people, and it impacts people on the ground. And the sad reality is, when it comes to this Victorian State Labor government, it's impacting those in regional and rural Victoria more than anywhere else, and they have to stop their neglect. We're seeing it play out in road funding. The fact that they've cut road maintenance funding by 95% over the last couple of years is just nothing short of a disgrace. And the state of the roads are just deteriorating before our eyes as a result. But it's not only roads where we're starting to see it, we're also starting to see it impact on our local health services as well. And the figures that came out last week, which shows that the pressure on hospitals' budgets continues to grow, and many of our hospitals, including in southwest Victoria, are now running in the red, just shows how badly this government has mishandled projects, and in particular mishandled money, and it's having a real impact, because when your roads deteriorate, when your health network deteriorates, then what that means is it means pain for people, pain for families, and pain for what they have to pay, whether it be in getting tyres and rims fixed, on whether it be trying to find other ways to get the health care that they need. But it's not only through that we're seeing, we're also seeing it in delays when it comes to projects, delays when it comes to fixing roundabouts, delays when it comes to doing community projects which will benefit the community. And we're starting to see things like the 12 Apostles precinct run year upon year upon year late, because this government cannot manage these projects and cannot manage the money around them. 12 Apostles precinct, we gave over $110 million towards from a federal government point of view, and still the action that the state government has taken on that has been minimal. They have to get their act in order.
Minister for Aged Care and Sports.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Jabiru Community College in my electorate of Lilly provides a flexible and personalised education experience for young people in years 10, 11 and 12 who are at risk of falling through the cracks of mainstream schooling. Established in 2011, the college has come ahead in leaps and bounds since their move to the new purpose-built facility in Zilmere in 2017. So I was really pleased recently to represent Education Minister Jason Clare at the official opening of Jabiru's new flexible learning and visual arts spaces and outdoor learning area, which was delivered thanks to $900,000 in funding from the Albanese Labor government via the Capital Grants program. Earlier this year, Minister Clare and I dropped into Jabiru for a visit. Staff and students were able to showcase the school's unique model of secondary education that focuses on delivering a safe and creative learning community where young people from diverse backgrounds can access a quality education. A lot of work has gone into this project, which has delivered the conversion of ground floor space to a visual art studio, general learning area, withdrawal spaces and a learning commons, as well as a covered outdoor learning area and a kiln shelter. These new facilities will provide school staff, teachers and students at Jabiru with better, more modern spaces in which to work, teach and learn. The Albanese Labor government strongly believes in providing the best possible resources so that local students can realise their potential and develop the skills they need to go on to further study or to find a job. I'd also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the work of long-time co-principals at Jabiru, Francis Misson and David Powell, who finish their tenure at the college next month. David and Francis have worked tirelessly to create a safe, vibrant and caring school community, and I'd like to acknowledge their dedication and service to young Northsiders and wish them every success for the future. In the same week, I was also able to attend the Nudgee College Awards Night, the Sandgate District State High School Annual Awards and the St Patrick's College Night of Excellence. In addition to celebrating the outstanding achievements of Northside students, we also farewell the St Patrick's College Principal, Mr Chris Mays, who is retiring after leading the college for the past 10 years. Mr Mays, thank you for your service to the St Pat's community, to your personal mentoring of me, and I wish you very well in your retirement. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, with my remaining time, and I'm sure with the support of the members for Blair and Fremantle, I would like to send a massive congratulations to the world champions, our Paramatildas. The Paramatildas have secured a historic win at the International Federation of Cerebral Palsy Football, the AFCPF Women's World Cup. The Paramatildas are actually our first national football side ever to become world champions, and I'm sure everybody in this chamber sends with me our very best congratulations, and thank you for making us so very happy over the weekend.
I call the member for Fisher.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Alongside social media, militant trade unions and overbearing bureaucracies, time and time again, I've stood up to the predatory gambling industry. At the big end of town, these entities have been causing physical, emotional and financial harm to Australians, and they are running rife under this hapless Labor government. Shoulder to shoulder with thousands of locals, I led the charge against the former Sunshine Coast Council and vested interests when they wanted to build a casino on the Sunshine Coast. As the former chair of the Social Policy and Legal Affairs Committee of this House, I chaired the inquiry into age verification, which called on government to establish an age verification regime for online gambling and wagering. As the former chair of the Finance and Corporations Committee, I chaired an inquiry into the use of credit cards and digital wallets for online gambling, calling on the government to ban their use in online wagering, gaming and gambling services. In short, you shouldn't be able to do online what you can't do in the real world. Alongside the member for Clark. Now, the member for Clark and I have various opinions on many things, but on this we agreed when we called for action on loot boxes on gaming platforms, which research shows is driving up dangerous gambling behaviours amongst young people and adults alike. I'm proud to be part of the coalition team which committed to a ban on gambling advertising during live sport. This bill was tabled 18 months ago, but Labor and the Greens opposed it.
Labor are owned lock, stock and barrel, not just by the unions but by vested interests. And Australians are paying the price. 3 in 4 Australian adults gamble. I'll take that interjection because you might want to listen to this and learn something. 3 in 4 Australians gamble at least once a year. 2 in 5 Australians admitted to gambling at least once a week. Concerningly, about 1 in 6 Australians aged 16 to 17 participated in underage gambling, a number which almost triples from age 18 to 19. This comes at a cost of $25 billion a year to punters. Despite these worrying trends, the Labor government has dumped its so-called comprehensive response to gambling advertising. What does this Prime Minister stand for? What has he accomplished? If he won't stand up on issues like these, how can Australians trust him in the challenging days ahead?
Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Last Friday I had the honour of attending the Fremantle Community Legal Centre's White Ribbon event at Walyalup Court in the city of Fremantle to stand against the scourge of men's violence against women and to support its elimination. It's unacceptable that for women in Australia and elsewhere, the threat of physical and sexual violence perpetrated by men is never far away. On the flagstones in the entry hall, white crosses stood in rows to mark squares of laminated testimony that carried the stories of murdered women. And for all those crosses, this wasn't a field of pain and loss that stretched back several years. Many of the stories were from August, September, October and November 2024. Deputy Speaker, today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. It serves as a reminder that the struggle for women's basic rights remains acute and desperate. It's an opportunity to remember that the work required to eliminate violence against women is an effort that needs all of us all of the time. It's genuinely shocking to think that men's violence contributes to more death, disability and illness in women aged between 15 and 44 in Australia than any other preventable risk factor. On average, 1 woman is murdered by her partner each week, and for First Nations women in Western Australia alone, as many as 1 in 2 women have experienced violence and abuse. It's unacceptable, and yet virtually every family will have had some experience of this deep societal disease. It's vital, therefore, that we lift our effort to challenge and change this awful state of affairs in every possible dimension, in our culture, in the services that support women who experience violence and in our law enforcement and criminal justice systems. Deputy Speaker, I want to acknowledge the staff and leadership of the Fremantle Community Legal Centre for their life-saving work. I'm glad to be a member of a government that recognises the incredible contribution these centres make in the cause of safety, peace and justice for Australian women. In September, the Albanese government announced an investment of $3.9 billion to back those services through a new National Access to Justice Partnership. Ending violence against women and children has rightly been a top-of-the-list priority for the Albanese Labor government. Indeed, we've invested more than $3.4 billion in initiatives to support the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children 2022 to 2032. We've, of course, legislated so that for the first time workers in Australia have an entitlement to 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave. We've made sure the Housing Australia Future Fund will deliver 4,000 additional dwellings for women and children fleeing violence, and we've funded the Leaving Violence program. Deputy Speaker, gender-based violence is a national crisis that requires attention and action at every level so that women and children in Australia can feel safe everywhere.
I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to acknowledge and thank the men and women of the New South Wales State Emergency Services. These people are volunteers. They have to go through significant training, Deputy Speaker, and it's particularly relevant that I'm speaking about them at a time that we are unfortunately heading again into bushfire season and also storm season. And our SES volunteers are there they're often the first on the spot to assist our fireys with bushfires. They rescue people in storms. They are out there in all of the elements and they are volunteers. And I want to particularly speak about 3 of the great local SES units that I have in my electorate of Hughes. First of all, the SES unit at Heathcote, and I recently, on the 12th of October, attended their Women Helping Women workshop day, where it was all the women SES volunteers. It was also attended by Debbie Platts, who was then the Acting Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the New South Wales SES. And on this day, they were showing local women how to build their resilience to properly prepare their homes and respond to storms and severe weather, because often, Deputy Speaker, we leave this in the hands of our men to go up and clean out the gutters and various things. Or I know in my household I certainly do, but this was very helpful, particularly for women who might be on their own or whose partner may not be able to climb up ladders and things like that. So it was a very helpful day. It was nice to see the sisterhood there supporting each other. Liverpool SES, Deputy Speaker, the Inspector Gunnar Hardy, the unit commander of Liverpool SES, very kindly came out to my EO on the 15th of November, just recently, with Chris Hack, the Senior Coordinator for Planning and Community, and showed my staff exactly what the unit is doing to get ready for the fire season and the bushfire season and the upcoming storm season, so that we can best help constituents if they do contact us. And lastly, Deputy Speaker, but certainly not least, Campbelltown SES unit. I went out to one of their training and muster meetings on the 22nd of October 2024. I met with Inspector Nathan McClelland, who's the unit commander, and Michael Van Vree, the deputy unit commander, and about 80 very dedicated SES volunteers who are undergoing their training services, so their training sessions. So, Deputy Speaker, I just wanted to thank all of the men and women in our SES services across our state.
Thank you. The member for Macon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, this week is National Asbestos Awareness Week, a week dedicated to continuing the campaign in raising awareness about the dangers of the use of asbestos and now silica. Asbestos-related diseases kill something like 4,000 Australians every year. Around 700 of those are from mesothelioma. Mesothelioma alone cost the health system an estimated $33.7 million in 2021, with asbestosis cost estimated at $14 million. Although asbestos was banned more than 20 years ago, the number of cases being diagnosed every year continues to rise. And the fact remains that 1 in 3 Australian houses, particularly those built between 1950 and 1980, still contain asbestos. Even more concerning is the fact that a number of countries that know full well of the dangers of asbestos continue to use the product. Countries like Indonesia, India, China, Russia, Brazil and others continue to use it each and every day. Across the world, the figures are hard to estimate, but I've seen figures of over 250,000 people every year dying from asbestos-related diseases. Silicosis is now the new asbestos, and it's again a very similar, trail in respect to the number of Australians that are living with and dying from silicosis. At least 579 Australians are living with the illness, and it's already caused the death of many others. And even more concerning, sadly, again, each and every day, thousands of other Australian workers are working with the product, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. Madam Deputy Speaker, as part of the campaign to raise awareness about the dangers of asbestos and now silicosis, this Friday the National Asbestos Victims Association of South Australia, the Asbestos Victims Association of South Australia, will be holding a commemorative service, as they do and have done every year since 2005 at Pittman Park in Salisbury. As part of the service, they lay out on the lawns adjacent to the memorial stone a cross for everyone that we know has died from asbestos in recent years. Every year, the number of crosses continues to rise and now runs into several hundred. A similar service is held by the Asbestos Diseases Society of South Australia on Thursday, and that's held at the Jack Watkins Memorial Park at Kilburn, where again they will highlight the number of deaths that are attributed to asbestos and now silicon. Madam Deputy Speaker, I again say to people that might be listening or reading the speech, asbestos is dangerous. If you know of it, you take the guidelines in respect to dealing with it. And I say to governments of all persuasions, we need to continue not only the fight to stop the use of it, but also the research into medical cures for it.
I call the member for Maley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. For those who are not aware, the Victorian Labor government last week banned rock climbing at many sites on Mount Arapiles on cultural heritage grounds. And I want to share the reactions, just some of the reactions of locals. I'll have more to say this evening and how these bans are impacting the regional health workforce. Here are some excerpts from my constituents' views, starting with Judith Bysouth, Secretary of the Nadamak Agricultural and Pastoral Society. She says, "We believe the feasibility of many existing volunteer community groups will disappear if we do not have the rock climbing community in Nadamak. The rock climbing community supports the annual Nadamak show through our unique rock climbing wall for children. The Rock Climbing Club and the wider fraternity prides itself on being part of the community and provides a unique experience for children in a safe environment on show day." Patrick Milkinson says, "Earlier this year, I bought a house here. I had dreams of my 17-month-old son growing up with the same connection to Nadamak and Mount Arapiles landscape that I have enjoyed for so many years. In all likelihood, Nadamak will become just a shell of its former self. Sadly," Patrick says, "my family and I will not be staying in the region." Robert Oliver of Nadamak says, "While the Labor government and its current members have had my vote, I will not be supporting them again until it makes significant review of its current park management strategies." Emma Cooper of Nadamak said, "Years ago, we first arrived at Mount Arapiles, and with just a tent and the excitement of finally living close to the cliffs we had dreamed of climbing. We set up at the Pines, where we quickly found ourselves embraced by a community of fellow climbers and outdoor enthusiasts. The local town of Nadamak soon became part of that dream, and we transitioned from the Pines to a rental home in Nadamak, bringing not just our passion for climbing, but our professions as a nurse and a counsellor. For many of us, this place is more than just a landmark. It's part of who we are. The impact on the health workforce alluded to by Emma is what I will speak further about this evening."
We call the Minister for Early Childhood Education and Youth.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Brother Thomas Oliver Pickett, better known as Brother Ollie, on being named the Senior Australian of the Year for Western Australia. Now, as the member for Cowan, I've had the distinct honour of working alongside some of the most exceptional individuals, people whose dedication and passion for our community are nothing short of inspiring. These are individuals who work tirelessly to support the most vulnerable among us, day in and day out, with an unwavering commitment and enthusiasm. And they don't do it for recognition, and they don't do it for personal gain. They do it because they care. And they care for those who can't care for themselves. They care for those in vulnerable situations. And most importantly, they care for the dignity and the respect of others. And they do all of this with humility, with selflessness, and with a heart full of compassion. And Brother Ollie Pickett is one of those extraordinary individuals and a well-deserved recognition of the tireless work that he has done. In 1996, Brother Ollie co-founded Wheelchairs for Kids, an organisation committed to providing adjustable wheelchairs and occupational therapy expertise to children in developing countries. Since then, more than, wait for it, 61,000 custom-built wheelchairs have been gifted to children across 81 developing countries, as well as to remote Australian First Nations communities. And all of this has been made possible from right in the heart of Cowan in Wangara, which I'm proud to say is a suburb that will soon be back within the electorate of Cowan next year. Now, what makes Wheelchairs for Kids even more remarkable is its foundation of volunteers. There are more than 250 people volunteering their time in the workshops, and if anyone has ever visited a Wheelchairs for Kids workshop in Wangara, it is absolutely amazing to see the evolution of one of these wheelchairs that gets shipped over to children in developing countries. And there are over 550 other people who volunteer from local community groups, sewing wheelchair covers, crocheting rugs, one of my favourite things, making soft toys. It's become one of Western Australia's largest volunteer-driven charities. And the success of Wheelchairs for Kids is testament to Brother Ollie's philosophy that if you're passionate about something, you can make it happen. He's 83 years old, but I've got to tell you, I wish I had his boundless energy even at my age. His boundless energy and passion continue to inspire hundreds of volunteers who share his vision. Thank you and congratulations, Brother Ollie, on this well-deserved accolade.
In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for member constituency statements has concluded, and I call on the clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 1 for a motion in relation to productivity growth.
And I call the member for Curtin.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to productivity growth in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper. Productivity is about doing more with less, meeting our needs with fewer working hours and fewer resources. It's not necessarily about consuming more goods. In fact, most of our economy and about 80% of our jobs are now in services. But it is about working smarter, not harder, to improve our standard of living. In the last decade, productivity growth has been the slowest in 60 years, about 1.1% per year, compared to an average of 1.8% for the 60 years before that. Australia has dropped from 6th in the OECD productivity rankings in 1970 to 16th. Some sectors are worse than others. Productivity in the construction sector has actually declined about 12% over the past decade. This is partially driven by restrictive work practices and a lack of investment in innovation, and this contributes to our housing problem. There's no sign that productivity will get better without intervention. Last year, the government revised down its annual productivity growth assumption from 1.5% to 1.2%, reflecting the slowdown in productivity over the past 2 decades. This means lower living standards for all Australians and less ability to fund and deliver the services the community expects. We can expect further productivity headwinds, with climate change creating more extreme weather events, geopolitical tensions driving more trade barriers for less efficient resource allocation, and demographic changes driving the need for more unproductive care services. For a long time, every generation has expected to be a bit better off than the one before, but this is no longer true. There are lots of factors that affect productivity. Much of the industrial world is facing similar challenges. Despite technology changes of the last 15 years seeming pretty radical, they're not translating to greater growth the way railroads and indoor plumbing did. It's harder to achieve productivity growth in services, and as we get richer and older, services including care make up more of our economy. Many of these factors are outside government control, but we need government to take a long-term perspective and pull all the available levers to ensure productivity grows so that young Australians can look forward with the same optimism as previous generations. With little genuine economic reform for 25 years, we've relied heavily on increased demand and prices for our commodities, rather than adding to our economic complexity or focusing on productivity. We are overdue for a broad tax reform discussion to ensure our tax system is fit for purpose for the next generation. Depoliticising tax reform will be key, and we need appropriate and trusted institutions to contribute to this. Luckily, we already have the Productivity Commission, so it's important that we actually listen to and respond to its expert advice. Government needs to be held to account when it comes to recommendations from independent experts. As taxpayers, we all pay for them, so we should be making the most of their advice. The Productivity Commission does a 5-yearly productivity inquiry and presented its last report, Advancing Prosperity, in March last year. Now, this report is 1,000 pages long and provides 29 reform directives. On education, there are recommendations about the use of technology, access to best practice resources, innovative school models, lifelong learning and student transitions to work. On migration, there are recommendations about better targeting the skilled migration system and reducing qualification barriers faced by skilled migrants. On workplace relations, there are recommendations about simplification and modernisation. Technology-related recommendations include internet access, cybersecurity, government data use and better diffusion of new knowledge, especially in the care economy. Business dynamism could be improved through competition, tax, trade and regulation reform. Looking to the government's own activities, the report says infrastructure should be subject to cost-benefit analysis, health funding should incentivise innovation, and data and foreign expertise should be used to drive best practice service delivery. When it comes to decarbonising, climate risks should be disclosed on property sales, adaptation-related infrastructure should be subjected to cost-benefit analysis, the safeguard mechanism should be expanded to cover the whole economy, and integrity of carbon offsets improved. These are all worthy recommendations. To show that it's serious about tackling Australians' productivity challenge, I call on the government to publish a formal response to the recommendations in the Productivity Commission report and commit to implementation. Voters are genuinely interested in leaders who take a long-term view, and this is a great opportunity to demonstrate a commitment to looking beyond an election cycle.
Member for Fraser. Sorry, is the motion second?
It is, and I reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. I call the member for Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman once said that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run it's almost everything. And this does reflect the fact that we need to focus on productivity growth if we're going to lift living standards in the long run and if we're going to put ourselves in a position to deal with some of the first-order challenges that our society faces. So in that extent, I agree with some of the underlying sentiments of the motion that's been put before us today. Productivity is absolutely key to our economic agenda and more broadly. And as the previous speaker alluded to, productivity is important in many ways. Firstly, multi-factor productivity growth is critical to ensure that we get more out of an existing set of inputs. It's also obviously critical to innovation. It's important not just that we get more outputs out of a given set of inputs, but that we actually create new outputs, new services. And that's why it's so important to look at the context in which this government assumed office after the last election. We came to office after a decade leading up to 2020 in which productivity growth had been the lowest it had been for over 60 years, 1.1% compared to 1.8% over the 60 years leading up to 2019-2020. Indeed, the trajectory of productivity growth was so bad that productivity growth had fallen for 5 consecutive years in the lead up to the pandemic. So this government has, right from the beginning, seen turning around productivity growth as absolutely central. But as almost all macroeconomists would agree, turning around productivity growth takes time. There's typically a lagged effect between investing in the economy, between changing regulation and seeing productivity growth come through in the statistics. So we will see that again this time, but this government has invested in a range of important policy reforms that will pay off in important ways. And indeed, to make reference to the PC reform agenda that the previous speaker alluded to, many of the government's priority areas for reform overlap with those areas identified by the Productivity Commission. So I want to talk on the 5 pillars that this government has used as a frame for its productivity agenda. I won't have time to run through all of the various components, of course, but I think these will point to the fact that this government is turning productivity growth around and that it is doing so on a very broad basis. The first of those pillars is that we need a more dynamic, competitive and resilient economy. And if I might say, and somewhat self-indulgently, Deputy Speaker, the committee that I chair, the House Economics Committee, looked at this in great detail, and some of the reforms some of the recommendations that came out of our competition and economic dynamism review are now coming to fruition. Reforms of mergers laws, reforms in relation to non-compete clauses, and there are others in this chamber who signed up to some of those recommendations. Those are recommendations which I think will have a real impact. Strengthening and streamlining approval processes, removing 500 nuisance tariffs. So there are a significant number of reforms already underway, being implemented in the Parliament at this very time, which will have a significant effect on productivity. There's a range of reforms right from day one, and indeed some of the very first laws passed by this Parliament in this term related to the skilled and adaptable workforce, which is the second of the 5 pillars. University reforms, fee-free TAFE, a record investment in skills. Now, many of these reforms are about fairness, but they are also about productivity. There are also a number of reforms in relation to the third of the five pillars, harnessing data and the digital economy, expanding the NBN into digital areas, a range of apprenticeships in digital apprenticeships, and that's something which I'm seeing in my own electorate. There's investing in the net zero transformation, which is something which many in this chamber at this point in time would agree with. That is critical for protecting our environment and our society, but also will have productivity benefits. And then there's the ageing population and the care economy, a huge and growing part of our economy. And we have put in place a number of reforms through the NDIS and its sustainability, through more aged care services at home. So this government is turning productivity around. It does take some time for it to come through in the official statistics, but it will. It will be reflected in those statistics because we have reforms right across the economy, right across our society, and this will benefit us both in terms of our societal, both in terms of quality of life and our economic statistics.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Australia prides itself on being the lucky country, the land of the fair go. But since the end of the mining boom, Australia's economic certainty has been less self-assured. We're not making the businesses and innovation that will drive the next golden era of growth. Business investment is down, particularly in non-mining sectors, where it's fallen from 9% of GDP to 4% of GDP over the last 30 years. As a result, Australia has had the worst decade for productivity in the last 60 years, and Treasury has downgraded our long-term productivity assumption. Productivity is the key to growing prosperity and living standards. Over the last 40 years, productivity growth is responsible for 80% of real wages growth. Not to mention that in a cost of living crisis, boosting productivity is the only sustainable way to both lower prices and increase real wages. And people are noticing this gap in productivity. Only 8% of the country, recently in a recent Redbridge poll, believed that the standard of living in Australia will be better off for the next generation. This is unprecedented, and at the heart of this is our failure to address productivity. We need strong economic reform to drive productivity, and while I respect the contribution that the government has made in this term, it is nowhere near enough. And when I speak to businesses and I look at the productivity report, there are 4 key areas. We need reform of the tax system, we need it to make it simpler to do business, we need to ramp up innovation, and we need to make our tax dollars work better. Firstly on tax. With the last major reform in our tax system introduced in 2000, nearly 1 in 3 Australians have never seen a substantial change to the way that tax is collected. In that time, the shape of our economy has transformed and our society has fundamentally shifted. We need reform in the tax system, both to avoid taxes that distort the economy, such as stamp duty, as well as creating a tax system that incentivises the changes we know we want to make, such as to increase investment in our economy, as well as to boost aspiration and work. Secondly, we need to make Australia the best place to start and grow a business. Every government promises to cut red tape, but under-delivers. We're adding greater regulation. We're very good at that in this House, but we are not very good at removing it. And I speak to medical researchers who spend a quarter of their time writing grant applications, childcare workers who spend less time with the kids because of their burden of paperwork, and clean energy companies waiting 7 years for a wind farm approval. Part of this also relates to the burden on businesses relating to industrial relations, a policy setting that has become overly politicised in this country, swinging like a pendulum depending on who is in power. Research conducted by E61 shows that it has led to perverse outcomes on business decisions, including an overdriving casualisation in the workforce and a decline and an increase in capital investment instead of on investment in people. You know, in the construction industry alone, productivity has declined by 18% on a per hours worked basis since 2012. So we need genuine review of workplace settings and an increase for which threshold for which these laws apply take on, particularly in terms of the effect on small and particularly young businesses. Thirdly, we need a ramp up on innovation. Australia is a more challenging place for companies to go from start-up to scale-up relative to our peers. On a per capita basis, Australia has half the early stage investment per funding available than the UK and around a third of the US. This is despite having the third largest pension scheme in the world. We've come a long way in this last decade, but data from the RBA shows that it's international investors, not domestic, who are doing the heavy lifting. The proportion of early stage investment made from superannuation has declined from 60% to 30% in the last decade. This has several causes, but principally we need to look at RG97, Your Future, Your Super, and some of those incentives around early stage investment, as well as how do we make sure that contracts, and particularly government contracts, are also open to young, innovative Australian firms so they can bring their best of the world-class innovation to Australia, not just to overseas. And finally, government is responsible for around 40% of spending in this country and is frankly, government spending is a major drain on our productivity growth. So this has to be an area of greater scrutiny, making our tax dollar work better. And I think the place to start time and time again is infrastructure spending, where we spend billions of dollars a year in this space, but we are losing $30 billion at the current rate on cost overruns. So I urge, finally, the Treasurer and the Government to come back to us honestly about the Productivity Commission's report on advancing prosperity and tell us which ones they're going to back, because these policy settings are not nice-to-haves. If we do not get this right, the economic opportunities we took for granted won't be available to our children.
I call the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I share the concerns that the member for Curtin raises in this motion. I respectfully disagree with the motion's description of some of the drivers, and I think the long-term realisation of productivity growth in our country will come down to a range of complex and interrelational factors that will play out over the long term. When the Albanese Labor government came to office, productivity had already been in freefall for a considerable period of time. In the June quarter of 22, productivity experienced the largest quarterly decline in 45 years, a staggering 2.4% drop. And over the previous decade, productivity growth fell to its slowest rate in 60 years, averaging just 1.1% annually. And this was, of course, no accident. It was the direct result of deliberate policy choices by the coalition, choices that suppressed wages, undermined job security, and ignored the need for investment in skills and industries of the future of our economy. This government believes in a different approach. We understand that investing in workers is not just about fairness, it is also key to lifting productivity and driving sustainable economic growth. When workers are paid fairly, when their jobs are secure, and when their workplaces are safe and supportive, they are healthier, happier, and they are more productive. Fair wages and secure jobs reduce turnover, saving businesses the cost of recruitment and training. Workers with access to paid leave, manageable hours and safe working conditions perform better and innovate more effectively. By investing in workers, we're investing in the foundations of a strong and resilient economy. The Albanese government's commitment to this principle is reflected in our workplace relations reforms. We're ensuring that all workers have access to minimum standards and that wage growth is not just a hope but a reality for all workers. We're supporting collective bargaining, creating pathways to secure employment and addressing long-standing inequities such as the gender pay gap. Unlike the opposition, who prefer to pit workers against one another in a race to the bottom, the Albanese Labor government are focused on lifting everyone up. Deputy Speaker, improving productivity is not just about policies for today. It requires a forward-looking strategy that ensures the workforce is equipped for the challenges and the opportunities of the future. This is why our government has made skills and training a cornerstone of our economic agenda. By expanding free TAFE and increasing support for apprentices in critical industries such as construction, aged care, clean energy, we're building a pipeline of skilled workers who will drive growth and innovation. Investing in skills directly addresses one of the most significant barriers to productivity. When businesses cannot find workers with the right expertise, projects are delayed, costs rise, and economic opportunities are lost. By equipping workers with the skills they need to excel in high-demand industries, we're ensuring that businesses can operate at full capacity, take on new challenges, and adapt to a rapidly changing global economy. By breaking down barriers for women to enter traditionally male-dominated trades, we're also expanding the talent pool, ensuring that industries can access the best and brightest minds regardless of gender. This not only strengthens workforce participation, but also fosters diversity, which has been shown to improve problem-solving and innovation within teams. Australia's economic success also depends on creating an environment where businesses can thrive. This includes reducing compliance burdens by abolishing unnecessary tariffs, streamlining environmental approvals, and modernising merger regulations. We're also fostering investment in emerging industries where Australia has a natural advantage, such as renewable energy, advanced manufacturing and critical minerals. Deputy Speaker, this government understands that better paying conditions are not just good for workers, they're good for our economy. Fair treatment of workers leads to better retention, higher engagement and greater innovation. These are the building blocks of a productive and prosperous society. However, rebuilding productivity after a decade of neglect will take time. It will take more than one term of government to undo the damage caused by those opposite. But we are making progress. Business investment is now above levels seen during the mining boom, and we're creating the conditions for long-term sustainable growth. Deputy Speaker, improving productivity is about shaping an economy where the efforts of workers, businesses and industries are translated into tangible benefits, higher wages, stronger economic growth and better living standards for all Australians. The Albanese Labor government is focused on addressing the structural challenges that have held Australia back for far too long. By targeting the root causes of sluggish productivity and prioritising strategic long-term investments, we are working to ensure that the benefits of a stronger economy are felt by all Australians.
The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting, and I call the clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 2 for a motion in relation to Medicare.
And I call the member for Aston.
I move the motion relating to Medicare in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
Member for Aston.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the motion as circulated in my name. When I found a lump in my breast in late 1995, at the age of 25, I went straight to my local bulk billing GP that morning and she gave me a referral for a mammogram and ultrasound the following week. I was so grateful to have Medicare to help pay for these tests and to be able to see my GP on the same day I found the lump. I was a casual call centre worker and living in a share house at that time, so I didn't have much money to spare. When the test confirmed the lump as suspicious, I was booked in to see a breast specialist where she conducted a fine needle aspiration, and the next day I found out that lump was cancer. The following week I went to hospital for a lumpectomy and lymph node removal. If I had lived in a country that didn't have universal health care like our Medicare, I'd be in a very bad way financially. The financial burden in some countries without universal health care can cause much worse outcomes too. And that is why strengthening Medicare is so important to me and is something I support wholeheartedly for all Australians. Labor is the party of Medicare. It is in our DNA, and strengthening it is our top priority. At the last federal election, we said that there was no higher priority for Labor in the health portfolio than strengthening Medicare and rebuilding general practice. The current opposition leader and former health minister, on the other hand, as health minister, put a 6-year freeze on Medicare rebates, which then prompted the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners to take the extraordinary step of calling on GPs across the country to stop bulk billing in order to maintain the viability of general practice. Again, at the time of the last election, the Honourable Mark Butler said that general practice was in the most parlous state in the 40-year history of Medicare. Bulk billing was falling off a cliff because of the former health minister, now current opposition leader, Peter Dutton's 6-year freeze on Medicare rebates. This is precisely why the Albanese Labor government invested in...
Members should be called by their correct title.
I'm terribly sorry. The Honourable Peter Dutton's, the now current opposition leader, I think I did call him by his correct title, Peter Dutton's 6-year freeze on Medicare rebates. This is precisely why the Albanese Labor government's invested in Medicare by tripling the bulk billing incentive from 1st November last year, in the largest investment in bulk billing history. In this year's budget, the Albanese Labor government provides $2.8 billion to continue to strengthen Medicare. This is in addition to the historic $6.1 billion investment in Medicare in the 2023-24 budget. Another fantastic investment in healthcare our government has achieved is Medicare urgent care clinics. We have opened 77 clinics across Australia, and that figure includes 19 of the 29 clinics announced in this year's budgets. These clinics make an enormous difference for patients and to ease the pressure on busy hospital emergency departments. They operate fully bulk billed, open 7 days a week with extended hours, and they accept walk-in patients, no appointment necessary. There have been almost 860,000 visits to these clinics across Australia, and they've all been completely bulk billed. In my electorate of Aston, there's been over 2,400 visits to the one in Bayswater since it began operating as an urgent care clinic in September this year. We know the opposition have never supported these clinics because they have never supported Medicare. The Honourable Angus Taylor has made it clear these Medicare urgent care clinics...
Can you...
Shadow Treasurer, Honourable Angus Taylor, Shadow Treasurer, has made it clear these Medicare urgent care clinics are on the chopping blocks and they will close. If elected, they'll cut these urgent care clinics, like just how the opposition leader, when he was health minister, cut funding from Australia's health system by implementing 6-year freeze on Medicare rebates. Labor went to the 2022 election promising Australians that we would make medicines cheaper, and we're delivering on that promise. We've also introduced 60-day prescriptions for around 300 common medicines, meaning that millions of Australians with a stable ongoing health condition are saving time and money. Our government made medicines cheaper and introduced these 60-day prescriptions. The former health minister, now opposition leader, the Honourable Peter Dutton, tried to add $5 to every script, voted against cheaper medicines and tried to block 60-day prescriptions. The fact is, those opposite, and especially the former health minister, now current opposition leader Peter Dutton, cannot be trusted with Medicare. But Australians understand that ours is a government that is committed to strengthening Medicare, and that's precisely what we have delivered since we were elected.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for this motion? And I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I was here for the motion that's been brought by the member for Aston, and I was here to hear her speech, which I find quite incredible on a number of levels, but it's always interesting. Unfortunately, I know the member for Aston is a relatively new member, but when members stand up and simply read out party talking points, it doesn't make for a great speech, particularly when quite a bit of it was disingenuous, Deputy Speaker. And I just move first of all to the first part of this motion that's been brought by the member for Aston, where it says the government is strengthening Medicare and delivering cost of relief to Australians. It includes a record investment in bulk billing. Well, Deputy Speaker, that has not occurred in the seat of Hughes because of the 25 practices in my electorate with comparable data between 2019 and 2024, and this is coming from the Parliamentary Library, Deputy Speaker, it's not coming from party talking points. Of the 25 practices in my electorate of Hughes, only 4 now have continued to be bulk billed only. That has been a change since this Albanese Labor government coming in saying there's nothing more important than Medicare. That change has occurred in the 2.5 years that this government has been in. 3 of the practices that were previously bulk billing have moved to mixed billing. This means that generally only children and pensioners are then bulk billed. 10 have continued to offer mixed billing. 3 moved from mixed billing to fees applying for all services. 3 have remained simply as fees applied, and 1 previously listed as other is now described as mixed billing. So, Deputy Speaker, we have had a massive decline in bulk billing in the electorate of Hughes, and I have written to the Minister for Health about this. I invite him to come down and meet with these bulk billing practices because the GPs in my electorate of Hughes are furious on behalf of their patients. And Deputy Speaker, the second part of the motion, and it's a shame that the member for Aston hasn't stayed for her own motion, but this third part of her motion says that she welcomes the influx of new doctors entering the workforce. Well, Deputy Speaker, let me tell you what has happened in my electorate at Wattle Grove Family Practice. Family practice that's located out at Holsworthy. It has over 3,000 patients on its books. In that practice, Deputy Speaker, the minister has now changed the classification of the practice from outer metropolitan to inner metropolitan, which means that this practice has now lost a registrar and cannot get the registrar back. So we've gone from 4 doctors there down to 3, and that occurred in August. I started writing to the minister about this, and I thank particularly the advocacy of Dr John Stanford, who is the practice manager there at Wattle Grove Family Practice, and also to the over 500 people of South West Sydney that have written to me and signed a petition about this issue. I don't think that those 500 people, Deputy Speaker, agree that the Albanese Labor government has strengthened Medicare. They certainly haven't invested in Medicare. They have not invested in public health in my electorate, and that is proven. The Minister for Health has refused to assist to reclassify Wattle Grove Family Practice so that we can get that additional doctor. So when I hear that the member for Aston has been able to have an increase in doctors in her electorate, I can't help but ask, Deputy Speaker, is it the case that the Health Minister assisted the electorate of Aston because Aston is now represented by a Labor Member of Parliament? Because if not, why will he not assist? Why will he not assist the people? Why will he not assist the people in my electorate? I note the honourable member's interjection. I can show you all of the documentation. I've already sent it to the minister. He's not interested in assisting the people of South West Sydney. He's not interested in assisting those of us who are Liberal MPs. He's not assisted in that at all. And then we'll refer to women's issues.
Order. Order.
Deputy Speaker, please.
Order.
Deputy Speaker, thank you.
I
wonder if the interjections are because you know it's true. You're hearing the same things in your electorate. Well, Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry that the member for Aston didn't stay for her own motion, but this Health Minister, this government is not helping those in my electorate with health.
Thank you. The question is the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition said, to paraphrase, that you only value things you pay for. But I have news for her and for the Liberal Party. Australians value Medicare. They value our health system. They value access to a GP. They value access to hospitals, particularly in an emergency. And they value access to affordable medicines through the PBS. And despite the challenges of our health system, it is without a doubt first class in terms of affordability and access, and definitely in terms of quality. You wouldn't want to be sick anywhere else in the world. Labor is the party of Medicare. First introduced through Prime Minister Gough Whitlam's government as Medibank, then abolished by the subsequent Liberal government, but which, as it would seem all Liberal governments, does not value the public good of universal health care, then reintroduced as Medicare by the Hawke government. It is a fundamental part of the Australian way of life. It has improved the overall health of the country, has increased our life expectancy and has eliminated medical-related bankruptcies. But that hasn't stopped the Liberals and Nationals trying to undermine it. Who can forget when the now opposition leader Peter Dutton was Health Minister, he tried to introduce a GP co-payment, and when Labor blocked it in the Senate, he froze Medicare rates to try and force GPs to stop bulk billing. He cut $50 billion from public hospitals, $200 million from emergency departments, tried to force the introduction of fees to attend a hospital emergency department. He tried to add $5 to every prescription, which would have meant a significant impost on many people who rely on multiple regular medications to manage their health conditions. In comparison, we have cut the price of prescriptions, frozen PBS prices, introduced 60-day prescriptions to further cut the cost to patients, moves he tried to block. And he abolished Health Workforce Australia, which the AMA said would undermine capacity to ensure Australia has the right number of doctors in the right places. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. No wonder he was voted by doctors as the worst health minister ever. In comparison, we have tripled the bulk billing incentive, which has resulted in a 4% increase in bulk bill consults across South Australia, including in my electorate of Boothby. The government's 24-25 budget provides $2.8 billion to continue to strengthen Medicare, on top of the historic $6.1 billion investment in Medicare in the previous year. In 2023, we delivered the biggest indexation boost for Medicare in 30 years, and this year we delivered the second largest increase with almost $900 million in additional funding for Medicare. This government has delivered more than double the amount of indexation to Medicare than the previous government did in almost a decade. And Deputy Speaker, what a surprise! This has resulted in more junior doctors deciding to become GPs, up by 25%. In the last 2 years, 17,846 new medical practitioners registered to practice in Australia. That is more than any time in the last decade under those opposite, because turns out doctors want to work in the interesting and vital area of general practice if they can see it's financially sustainable. One of the election commitments that I was most pleased about at the last election, having worked in the health sector, was the announcement of 50 Medicare urgent care clinics across Australia, including one in Marion in my electorate. Since then, they have been such a raging success that we've actually opened 77 Medicare urgent care clinics. The Marion Urgent Care Clinic's been open for just over a year now and has had over 12,000 patients through its doors. That's 12,000 people who were too sick, too injured to wait for their normal GP, but not bad enough to go to an emergency department. People who instead got seen at the urgent care clinic instead of presenting to the hospital ED. Now, you would think that this amazing success story, making a direct benefit to the health of Australians, would be something we could agree on in a bipartisan manner. But no, the Shadow Treasurer has made it very clear that if a Dutton government is elected next year, the urgent care clinics are on the chopping block. They are making a deliberate decision to force Australians to have to choose between turning up to overcrowded emergency departments and making wait times even worse, or waiting to get an appointment with their GP, even if they're injured on the weekend. Labor is the party of Medicare. We know how important this is to the Australian way of life, and you can't risk a Dutton-led government with the health system, led by the man voted worst health minister ever.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak to the member of Aston's motion regarding Medicare. I relish the opportunity to highlight the significant ways Medicare is failing rural, regional and remote Australians under the Albanese government. Regional health is in crisis, particularly when it comes to workforce. A lack of workforce means everyday people cannot get the care they need in the right place or at the right time. An independently commissioned report published last year found that $6.55 billion a year is in deficit in healthcare spending for rural Australians. That's $848 per person per year, not being spent on healthcare in the regions compared to the cities. The gap is largely due to rural Australians' lack of access to primary care, and it's not because rural people don't need the care. Research shows very clearly that rural people live more years with illness or disability and die younger than their metropolitan counterparts. Life expectancy, for example, is highest in Sydney and lowest in outback Northern Territory, with a difference of 13.6 years for men, 12.7 years for women. This is outrageous. The Albanese Labor government should focus on rectifying the inequity in our regional health system, not maintaining their tunnel vision on voters in inner and outer metropolitan Australia and overinflating the success of their current policies. The Albanese government's tunnel vision is illustrated by changes made to the distribution priority area in 2022. The ill-considered changes quickly resulted in movement of doctors who, from regional towns like Mildura and Horsham, moved to larger inner regional cities or metropolitan cities. Labor's DPA change made the regional health crisis worse, not better. I have called repeatedly for these changes to be reversed. Another failing of this Labor government has been the introduction and rollout of urgent care clinics. These clinics are designed to help Labor state governments with overloaded emergency departments and failed primary care clinics. UCCs rob Peter to pay Paul by draining the workforce from private GP clinics to better paid taxpayer-funded positions in UCCs. The differential in pay and conditions between state-funded health services and Medicare-funded primary care is an ongoing issue in regional health, worsening workforce shortages around the country. The distribution of UCCs also favours Labor-held electorates, with coalition-held electorates in both cities and rural areas missing out. In fact, 66% of all UCCs are in Labor-held seats. Who would imagine? UCCs outside the capital cities are highly skewed towards large regional centres such as Labor-held Bendigo and Ballarat, and of little benefit to people living in the large swathes of our country outside these areas. This government has also hung their hat on the effectiveness of the changes to the rural bulk billing incentive, yet Labor's changes have been described as tinkering around the edges, given they only apply to children under 16 years and those with concession cards. Under Prime Minister Albanese, bulk billing rates have dropped from 88.8% in 2021 under the Coalition to 77.4% for the year 23-24. Hence, these changes have not met their aim of improving access to primary care. As I said in my maiden speech in 2019, a person's postcode should not determine their health status, but for people in Mallee, it absolutely does. I thank the doctors and health professionals in Mallee and in rural areas around the country for their dedication and hard work in providing high-quality healthcare to their communities. We must support our health workforce to do this. Often thankless, work by ensuring that regional health is high on the agenda and that Medicare funding for rural people is appropriate to the size and the nature of the challenges experienced. Only a coalition government will be focused on the needs of people all over this wonderful country. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. And the extraordinary attack we just heard on urgent care clinics I think should give us all pause for thought and recognise that these urgent care clinics are under real risk from the coalition at the next election. And I know the people in my community and the people who use the urgent care clinics in Chisholm, and we've got one in Mount Waverley, should be quite concerned about what a government led by the worst health minister in Australia's history would do to our community's health. We said at the election that there was no higher priority for Labor in the health portfolio than strengthening Medicare and rebuilding general practice. I grew up in a household where my parents ran general practices, so it is so dear to my heart that Australians have access to healthcare when they need it, regardless of how much money they might have to pay. Our budget from this year provides $2.8 billion to continue to strengthen Medicare. Of course, Medicare is a Labor invention, and we are proud of it. This $2.8 billion that we're going to continue to strengthen Medicare is in addition to what is, Deputy Speaker, an historic $6.1 billion investment in Medicare in last year's budget. And the reforms that we're introducing respond to the recommendations of the Strengthening Medicare Task Force, taking the key steps needed to address the many pressing challenges in our healthcare system and making sure that it is a system that can be sustained for years to come. Our government has delivered more than double the amount of indexation to Medicare than the previous government did in almost a decade. What a waste of time that was. We know the financial viability of general practice as we went into the last election was in serious trouble. There was a 6-year freeze on Medicare rebates that started when the now Leader of the Opposition was Health Minister. That is a damning record. We know that the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners took the step of calling on every GP in the country to stop bulk billing to maintain the viability of general practice. What a parlous state our health system was placed in under the now Leader of the Opposition when he was Health Minister. Absolutely Australia's worst. I hear from my friend who is a doctor and would know a thing or two about healthcare. Of course, strengthening general practice and Medicare is not the only thing our government is doing to protect and enhance the health of Australians. We went into the election promising that we would make medicines cheaper, and we're delivering on that promise. And it is quite amazing that people in my electorate have saved over $7 million since we introduced 60-day scripts. This is money back into the pockets of households when they really need that extra money. It's freeing up appointments at general practices right across my community and right across the country. And I know we've also, through our investments in Medicare and the changes we've made to bulk billing, we've had an additional almost 31,000 visits to bulk billing GPs. We know nationally too that we've seen a huge boost. In my home state of Victoria, we've had an additional 1.4 million visits to the GP. I think we should be concerned, as I started this contribution with, at what would happen to our healthcare system if Australia's worst health minister ever got anywhere near becoming Prime Minister. We know that there is an ideological dislike, hatred, loathing for Medicare. We saw that previous Liberal governments, in fact, axed universal schemes like Medibank. So there is form here. And as they say, the greatest predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. And so I think that we should all be very concerned at what will happen to Medicare, what will happen to our broader healthcare system if those opposite ever get the chance to be in government again. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Fadden.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's a great privilege to rise today and speak on this motion that was moved by the member for Aston, and I'll get to some of her contribution shortly. But let's be absolutely clear. This motion is an attack on the Leader of the Opposition and a desperate revival of the Medicare campaign that we saw in 2016. The Coalition has a proud track record in relation to government investment in the health of our nation, including in Medicare. And I think it's important to use this opportunity, Deputy Speaker, just to state some of the facts about how the Coalition actually run health in Australia. And as I said, what we've seen today is essentially a desperate attempt to resuscitate that disgraced Medicare campaign. What actually happened when the Coalition was in government was that we increased hospital funding from $13.3 billion to $22.7 billion. We had $537 billion in the forward estimates, which included things like a $7.3 billion increase in Medicare, a $10.1 billion increase in aged care. We added and amended 2,800 PBS medicines. And whilst the Leader of the Opposition was the Health Minister, which the current Labor government like to refer to quite frequently, one of the key things that he actually did was started the Medical Research Future Fund to the tune of $20 billion. Now, another fun fact, which is frequently overlooked by those opposite, is that whilst the Leader of the Opposition was the Health Minister, Medicare bulk billing rates were actually at about 84%. And as we had confirmed in question time recently, under the previous Coalition government, they actually reached 88% bulk billing rates. And incredibly,
you wouldn't believe this, but under the Labor government, they are down to 77%. So whilst Labor talks a big game on managing Medicare and delivering health services, the numbers just don't stack up. And it's also interesting that they continue to refer to their Medicare urgent care clinics as one of the key planks in how they're increasing bulk billing services. So I thought I'd use a little local example from the electorate of Fadden, Deputy Speaker, one that is in the suburb of Oxenford, which is just tucked in neatly next to the M1 and home to some of our favourite theme parks. But in Oxenford, you will find a Medicare urgent care clinic. But here's the thing. I just remember something from some time ago that a previous Labor government in November 2013 opened the Gold Coast's first GP super clinic at Oxenford. Miraculously, this is located at number 2 Leo Graham Way, Oxenford. Now, that is incredible. You would think that 10 years later, to the month, Health Minister Butler, then in November 2023, announces a Medicare urgent care clinic at 2 Leo Graham Way, Oxenford. And the striking similarities, they are in the same building, they do the same thing, they provide bulk billing services with longer hours. What have we got, Deputy Speaker? We have got a GP super clinic that was rebadged as a Medicare urgent care clinic. No increase in patient numbers. This is the same service in the same building which the Health Minister is dressing up as a new initiative to deliver on an election commitment, when actually that is completely misleading to the Australian people. The Coalition has a proud record on health. Labor are typically, with this motion, trying to search for a corflute slogan for the upcoming election. They should spend less time trying to attack the Coalition, more time trying to fix the health system, and Australians know the Coalition can be trusted on health.
The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting, and I call the clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 3 for a motion in relation to Royal Far West.
I call the member for Parks.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to the Royal Far West in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
Call the member.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In December this year, next month, the Royal Far West will be 100 years old. I can proudly say that its roots are firmly implanted in the Parks electorate. Reverend Drummond, spending time himself recuperating in Manly all that time ago, thought, wouldn't this be wonderful to bring children from the country to the coast where they could get medical care and assistance, and not only those children but their families as well. And so those first lot of children that came in from the country came from places like Brewarrina, Burke, Cobar, and one of the first establishments was a railway carriage, an old railway carriage that was repurposed for the use as a clinic in Cobar. And so the Royal Far West has a long and proud history in delivering care to children from remote parts of Australia, largely New South Wales, but now expanded into other areas. And originally, as children and families were brought into their facility at Manly, an all-encompassing, all-round, service that not only focused on the needs of the child, but how the family could assist as well. But clearly, with the growing need and the changes in technology, the Royal Far West now has expanded, providing services over a much larger area to a larger number of schools. And in 2019, the Royal Far West was funded under the previous government, under Minister Hunt, when I was actually Assistant, the Regional Health Minister, for expanding their services under telecare. And we now are seeing a significant number of children, and indeed last year they supported 21,000 country children. And while telecare and technology is not a complete replacement, it's certainly enabling them to reach a large number of people. And I've actually sat in to some of the lessons, and a great example of this is Narromine Public School, which has been doing this now for 10 years in my electorate, where there is a coordinator in the school, there is an occupational therapist, a speech therapist or whatever, working on screen. What the therapist has is replicated in the school, and we're seeing after the initial assessments done of the child, significant contribution, because as we know, and my good friend and colleague opposite, the member for Macarthur, would know, the sooner an intervention can happen with a child, the better chance we've got to get them on the straight and narrow. There is a concern, though, that the funding runs out next year, and I met with the Royal Far West last week. They are concerned because clearly they are caught up in the electorate cycle as well. We've got an election coming up. There's uncertainty around that. Will there be a budget? Will there not be a budget? All of those things are concerning them. And now that they've got this up and running, if they had this funding cut, that they would have to see a reduction of about 50% in the number of students that they support. So clearly, the purpose for me for bringing this motion to the House is not only to provide to the members and the House itself the importance of the Far West, but also to highlight to the government of the day, and clearly also the opposition as well, if there's a change of government, the need for certainty around this funding for the Royal Far West. It does a wonderful job. It gets a lot of children in a practical way, in a meaningful way, and is making a huge change to what they're doing. 20% of the children that are under these programs are Indigenous, and 50% are under 8 years old, and that's exactly the time when this intervention wants to be. So I recommend the motion to the House and strongly urge the government to look at the funding ongoing.
Is there a seconder for the motion?
The motion is seconded.
And you reserve? The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Macarthur.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank the member for Parkes for bringing this motion. Can I also add that I'm very sad to see him leaving Parliament at the end of this term. He's been a great addition to the Parliament. In particular, his interests in rural and regional health have been really important, and I thank him for his service, and also on the Health Committee he's been a great asset, so I thank him for that. I know the Royal Far West very, very well. In fact, when I was the Senior Registrar at the Children's Hospital many, many years ago, my wife and I used to take kids from the Royal Far West who were staying there out for day outings, etc., around Sydney. I remember one boy, Peter, a lovely, lovely kid with very unstable diabetes, and people were frightened to take him away from healthcare. So my wife and I took him to lots of different places. We took him to Easter Show, we took him to Bondi Beach and all around the place, because he was staying in Far West from Broken Hill, so that he could be treated at the Children's Hospital, then at Camperdown for his diabetes, which was, as I said, quite unstable. And he stayed there for many weeks at a time, and he used to come every year. He came from a family at Broken Hill who struggled with his health care, and I think the Royal Far West really made a difference to his health care and the management of his diabetes. We had another boy, quite a funny little boy from Lismore, I remember, called Shane. Shane had something called Ondine's curse, which is a very rare condition. When he goes to sleep, he stopped breathing, which sounds quite odd, but that's what he had. And he was stayed at Far West quite a lot, whilst his ventilator was being stabilised before he went back to Lismore. We took him out several times, also took him to the Easter show. And another girl called Melissa who had seizure disorder. She came from, I think Dunedoo she came from, and she was Royal Far West while her epilepsy was being stabilised. And the paediatrician at Manly, my old friend Alan Oldfield, who's no longer with us, used to help manage these kids whilst they stayed in the Royal Far West in cooperation with their GP or paediatrician where they came from. It was a great service. Clearly the needs have changed a lot in the last, well really it's over 40 years since we cared for these kids, and needs have changed a lot. And the government has provided significant funding for mental health support, particularly following the floods and bushfires that have beset our country in the last decade, particularly for support in communities for kids with developmental problems. And as the member for Parks had commented, once these kids are picked up and hopefully picked up early, intervention makes a huge difference, not only to their lives but to their families as well. And the Royal Far West has been integral in that, trying to replicate services for kids from the bush compared to kids who lived in the inner cities and close to the major children's hospitals. And the government's provided $20 million through the Royal Far West for a community health and hospitals program. We've provided telehealth services, and it is important, I agree with the member for Parks, that this funding is committed to over the longer term so that ongoing services can be provided for those kids. We're very lucky to have a service like the Royal Far West system, and I for one will commit to getting the government to continue supporting Royal Far West in their expanded role to those communities that have been really severely affected by the natural disasters, which in this era of climate change are not going to stop, they're going to continue. And it's very important that the Royal Far West continues in its fantastic work throughout our rural and regional communities. The mental health system, we know, wherever we are in Australia, is facing huge challenges. Our government is committed to making sure that we have fit for purpose and best for purpose services throughout the country, not just in the inner cities. And mental health reform was part of our last federal budget, and it will continue to be a focus of our current or our future budget in 2025. We're very lucky to have a service like Royal Far West. I enjoyed very much the time that I spent learning from them and how to best provide services to kids in our rural and regional areas, and long may it continue. I thank the member for Parks for bringing this motion, and I commit to supporting it. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Gippsland.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And just like the member for Macarthur, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the member for Parks for bringing forward this very important motion, but also acknowledge that he has announced his retirement and gave a valedictory speech last week. And, Deputy Speaker, small town Australia does need big voices, big, strong, sensible voices, and the member for Parks has been that throughout his career. And it's also fitting the member for Macarthur mentioned Broken Hill in his contribution, because not so long ago I was at a function with the member for Riverina, and he told the member for Parks, you know, if Broken Hill was in my electorate, they'd just call it the Hill, because I would have fixed it by now. So, all dad jokes aside, the member for Parks has served with great distinction in this place. He's been a friend and a trusted colleague whose passion for rural and regional Australia knows no bounds. And he's always been someone focused on practical and sensible outcomes, and that's why I think this motion today fits very nicely with his entire mode of operation throughout his political career. Because at its heart, Deputy Speaker, this motion is about helping young people achieve their full potential, but also publicly acknowledging an organisation which has done more than just talk about the problem. The Royal Far West has been out there for 100 years now, making a difference in our rural and regional communities. Royal Far West has had 100 years of service to Australians and being able to overcome the tyranny of distance to provide those early intervention services which have made it easier, for young people in our rural and regional communities to access services and to achieve their full potential. It's also particularly important to acknowledge, I think as the member for Parkes did, it's helped to reduce the cost of living for families in those rural and remote communities by being able to access services without always having to travel to the metropolitan areas to access those sorts of facilities. So Rural Far West has demonstrated a capacity and a capability, which is why I think it's so important that this government and any future government continues to invest in solutions which have been proven to work on the ground in rural and regional areas. The opportunity, particularly for us in our rural and remote communities, to provide services using technology in locations where we can't always attract the skilled specialist health staff we need. Nothing's better than having a skilled health provider actually treating people in our communities or going around schools and meeting with young people. But if that's not available to us, using technology in this way, through the manner in which Rural Far West has been doing through its services with the National Paediatric Telecare Service, is a great example of a local solution to a local problem being financed by the Commonwealth, but really making a difference on the ground in our rural and remote communities. I would say one other point though, Deputy Speaker, and it's I guess a shout out to any young health professionals thinking about careers in rural and regional communities. Don't believe everything you read in the newspapers. Get out there and have a look and see what you can experience, and the career fast track that does exist in our rural and regional communities. You will get exposure to a whole range of issues and ailments and conditions that will actually fast track your career. It's a great experience for anyone in the health sector looking at a rural experience to consider moving to a rural and remote community and offering their services to communities that perhaps don't normally have access to those skilled health professionals. So it does make sense to invest in the continuation of the National Paediatric Telecare Service because, as the member for Parkes indicated, there are very clear benefits in early intervention. There are clear benefits in terms of the young person, in terms of their social achievements and their own personal achievements in life, but also there are economic benefits to the government. The savings that ensure from that early intervention and preventing some longer-term issues are very clearly evident in the reductions in cost for the government down the track. So it is well known, Deputy Speaker, that Rural Far West provides outstanding services, and it's also well known that in our rural and remote communities, our children, their health, their education, their well-being has some additional barriers. And the whole point of what the Rural Far West has been doing and what the member for Parkes has done throughout his entire parliamentary career is try to help young people in our communities achieve their full potential by improving access to services for them. And the final point I would make, Deputy Speaker, is in relation to the ongoing funding model. The reason why the member for Parkes has moved this motion is providing certainty and continuity of funding then gives an organisation like Rural Far West the confidence to employ a workforce and have that ongoing employment opportunities. What happens when funding runs out on short-term contracts is the workforce has to start looking around for a new job probably 6 or 8 months before the contract even runs out, and they sometimes leave prematurely. So having that certainty, that continuity, will give confidence for Rural Far West and for their workforce to continue to make a huge difference right throughout rural and regional Australia, and I commend the member for Parkes for his motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call a member for Bean.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Look, I'd also like to commend the member for Parkes for bringing this motion before the House. Rural Far West is a charity dedicated to improving the health and well-being of country children, has been doing so since 1924, almost 100 years. Their work addresses service gaps and supports our most vulnerable families and communities to help students meet learning, well-being and engagement outcomes through unique, multidisciplinary, child-centred approaches that partners with families, schools and communities to provide truly integrated and collaborative wraparound care. RFW provides multidisciplinary allied health screening, assessment and therapy services for children up to 12 years old. It also provides capacity building services for parents, carers, teachers and local health professionals. And while RFW traditionally operates from a hub in Manly, New South Wales, using telecare and also through working with local communities, RFW services extend to rural and remote areas right across Australia. And Deputy Speaker, I note that while RFW does not operate or service the ACT or my electorate of Bean, it plays an important role across the region. And as a member of this national parliament, I, and I believe all of us in this parliament, have an interest in appropriate and cost-effective services being delivered for all citizens across all parts of the nation. And at this point, I note and acknowledge the correspondence my office has received about this matter from the Catholic Education Office, Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn. The Catholic Education Office have communicated to me the important work done in remote communities like Lake Cargelligo and the critical difference they're making to some of our local First Nations communities. And these representations have aided my understandings of the works that RFW does in the capital region and the issues around its future. I'm advised since the COVID-19 pandemic that RFW has shifted its footprint to delivering approximately 40% of their clinical and service staff now in communities across the 4 states it services. In 2023, they supported over 21,000 country children, parents and educators, of whom 30% identified as First Nations Australians. $19.7 million over 7 years was provided to RFW through the Community Health and Hospitals program in 2018-19 to expand their service and upgrade necessary infrastructure. This funding runs to 30th of June 2025. The government also provided RFW with just over $300,000 in 2023 under an October 2022 budget allocation to support community sector organisations to manage the costs of staff wages and higher inflation. In addition to the CHHP, RFW received Community Recovery Program and Bushfire Recovery Program funding across 6 separate state and Commonwealth grants. The mental health and wellbeing of all Australians is a priority for the Australian Government, including children and their families affected by disasters. I recognise the important work of Royal Far West, particularly their work supporting young people through periods of national disaster and recovery, but the pressure that this places on their funding sources. The National Disaster Mental Health and Wellbeing Framework was released in 2023. The framework was developed in consultation with and agreed by state and territory governments. The framework aims to guide how governments and recovery partners can consistently and sustainably support the delivery of mental health services and improve the wellbeing of affected individuals before, during and after disasters. The Department of Health and Aged Care is working closely with the National Emergency Management Agency to implement the framework. Under the frameworks, states and territories have the lead role in emergency planning and coordination. The government recognises the importance of locally led and delivered responses and that states and territories are best placed to identify the type and level of assistance to make available following a natural disaster. But, Deputy Speaker, it's critical that organisations like Royal Far West are not forgotten in this work, and which often when we do have it at national levels, organisations like these can fall through the cracks despite the critical work they're doing. And so I support the government continuing to work closely with Royal Far West and will of course engage in further discussions about their future and support further funding for RFW.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. At the outset, I wish to heartily commend the member for Parkes for bringing forward this very important motion. And certainly for a regional member, somebody who represents half of the landmass of New South Wales, health is critical. And if you have a healthy electorate, you have a happy electorate. And then the member for Parkes, who has championed the cause of Royal Far West for as long as he has been in this place, since 2007. Indeed, even long before that, when he was in local government, when he was just a concerned member of his country community. We this year celebrate 100 years of the Royal Far West, and I well recall on Monday 17 December 2018 when, as Deputy Prime Minister, I attended the opening of the Centre for Country Kids, state-of-the-art facility that Royal Far West opened at Manly. And I was there with Gladys Berejiklian, and the New South Wales Premier, the New South Wales Governor, David Hurley, and many, many others. Most importantly, and whilst they were august and distinguished and honoured guests. It was the kids who we were there for. It was the kids who were the most vital guests at that particular function. And I said at the time, and I don't usually quote myself, but just for the record, for generations, Royal Far West at Manly has held a special place in the hearts of country families when it comes to making sure distance is no barrier to accessing integrated health, education and mental support. The expansion of this wonderful facility means Royal Far West can support even more country children and their families and provide the support, respite and care they need. Children in the regions are the future of our communities, and the Liberals and Nationals government is proud its investment supports Royal Far West to ensure country children access the same services as their city counterparts and are given every opportunity to thrive. And that's what Royal Far West is about. That's what that $10 million investment was all about. And I don't think it matters what side of the House. This is important. This is proper. This is right. And when you see that 190,000 children in rural and remote Australia have health and developmental needs that are not being met, you understand, you appreciate just how important Royal Far West is. And they support, as we've heard, children's developmental, mental and behavioural health so they can reach their full potential. And all politics is local. I know even in my own sprawling electorate, not quite as large as the member for Parkes I appreciate, but just in my own electorate, 14 schools have 120 students benefit from the services that Royal Far West provide each week. And of the Royal Far West services, it's really important to note that 93% of educators are very satisfied with the service. 93%. 87% of children achieved or exceeded the goals that had been set. 97% of educators said they were more confident supporting the children they work with. 94% said they would want to receive services in the future. They're telling statistics, and they do tell a story of how vital this service is. And I know the member for Parkes and others have spoken about it too in this debate, about how ongoing funding is essential, is crucial, because what it will do will be providing certainty for staff. And when you get staff in remote areas, they do need that certainty because they want to have a reason to stay in that community, to provide for the children who most need the services. And since the beginning of the National Paediatric Telecare Service funding in 2020, the service has supported more than 30,000 total beneficiaries. It's expanded to 4 states, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and Western Australia. It's partnered with 152 schools and 64 early learning centres. It's something that strikes at the heart of what Royal Far West does, and we support it. We want it to continue. We want it even expanded because, and you even look at the Since the Better Learning, Better Lives pilot innovation, which worked across 5 rural and remote schools: Trundle, Rainbow, P12, Our Lady of Sacred Heart, Springshaw, Claremont and Middleton Public School. Royal Far West has had 560 children benefit from the program. The results are there, the service is there, we just have to have the political will to make it happen.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And can I too commend the member for Parkes for bringing forward this motion. The health and wellbeing of those in rural and remote communities is absolutely paramount, and in particular making sure people can get the services that they need when they need them. And I also want to make a bit of a comment on what the member for Gippsland was saying before he left the Federation Chamber, is that students should really consider a career, in any career, but in particular the medical career, medical field. They should consider a career in regional, rural and remote communities. I know that I've practiced in hospitals in those settings, and you do see a wide range of presentations. You become operationally and clinically independent, and you also provide life-saving and preventative care for people in some communities which healthcare can be quite scarce. So I want to agree with the member for Gippsland there that people should definitely consider a career in regional, rural or remote healthcare settings. Now, the Royal Far West, Deputy Speaker, it's a charity that is dedicated to improving the health and wellbeing of country children, and it was established long ago in 1924, and what it does, it provides multidisciplinary allied health screening and assessment and therapy for children up to 12 years old. Now, That is so important, that early screening and detection of pathology in younger years, if it is not identified and it is not treated, can have huge ramifications for people as they enter their adolescent and their adult life. And it can not only have an impact on their health, it can also have an impact on their ability to study or on their ability to enter the workforce or their social interactions with other people and how they interact in the community. So it's so important that we nip these issues in the bud early on so that they don't exacerbate and become a significant problem into the future. And that's what Royal Far West does. And it's not only in that allied health space as well. As the member for Riverina also pointed out, it provides capacity building services for parents and carers, also to teachers and local health professionals. Now, traditionally, it has operated from a hub in New South Wales, in Manly, and using telecare, Royal Far West services extended into rural areas, into New South Wales, into Queensland, WA, and also into Victoria. But we have found that since the COVID-19 pandemic, Royal Far West has shifted its footprint from this Sydney base, and approximately 40% of clinical and service staff now work in communities across the 4 states that it services, which I think is fantastic. That's a great thing. It's providing telecare and telehealth service is one thing, and there are benefits to that. But having people in place in situ where they can actually provide that assistance on the ground to people is something that we need. And like I said, whether it's the allied health, whether it's those teachers, parents and carers and support staff, it's something that's vitally important for children in these regional, rural and remote communities. Now, in 2023, Royal Far West supported over 21,000 country children, parents and educators, of whom 30% identified as First Nations Australians. And that's also an important thing to note as well, that our First Nations communities right across our country, we know, suffer from significantly worse health and social outcomes. I don't need to tell this chamber, a lot of our communities know that. So the support that Royal Far West is providing to these communities is absolutely needed. And we know that they also commenced telecare services in 2014, and $19.7 million over 7 years has been provided through the Community Health and Hospitals program in 2018 and 2019 to expand this service and upgrade necessary infrastructure, and this funding runs through to the 30th of June 2025. The government has also provided Royal Far West with just on $350,000 in 2023 under the October 22 budget, an allocation to support community sector organisations to manage the cost of staff wages and higher inflation as well. And in addition to this Community Health and Hospitals program, there has also been some community recovery program and bushfire recovery program support across Commonwealth grants. And thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting, and I call the clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 4, a motion relating to cash.
And I call member for Lawler.
I move the motion relating to cash in the terms in which it appears in the notice paper.
I call the member.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the motion this morning is about the House acknowledging that the Albanese government is making sure that Australians can continue to pay with cash for essential items if they want to, while also ensuring an orderly transition to the phasing out of cheques. We note that the government's plan will mandate that businesses must accept cash when selling essential items with appropriate exemptions for small businesses, and ensure that the cash can be used for essential purchases such as groceries and fuel, so that those who rely on cash will not be left behind. And as the member for Lawler, I welcome our action on this. And we're acting because of what we know. We know that around 1.5 million adult Australians rely on cash to make more than 80% of in-person payments. 80% of payments, and 1.5 million Australians. However, we also know the number of businesses refusing to accept cash is growing as cash use in Australia declines. And some of that decline is incremental. RBA data from 2022 shows that up to 94% of businesses reported accepting cash for payments, and that's a decline from 99% of businesses just prior to the COVID pandemic. So that feels like a small number, but it translates into millions of Australians feeling that our economy and the way we use money they're being left behind in this process. The RBA data also shows that around half of Australia's businesses plan to move away from cash payments in the near future. All of this means that we can, as all of us members of Parliament, we can see that this is going to make some Australians very nervous, particularly where they're accustomed to using cash and they have faith in a system that they've known. We know that the demography here is that older Australians are those more likely to be concerned about this and less likely to have moved into non-cash arrangements in their personal lives. So in my electorate, that's 17,000 pensioners, if we look at those in that older category, and I believe that they deserve the right to be able to depend on cash, and the Albanese Labor government will ensure that no one is left to fall through the cracks by implementing action to ensure that people can use cash for their purchases, particularly for essential purposes. We know there's a place for cash in our society and we can't deny older Australians this right. The announcement has been well received, both community groups and businesses, as well as individuals who simply prefer using cash in their transactions. Whether it's at the supermarket checkout, the local petrol station, when it comes down to the essentials, Australians will have the comfort of knowing that they can pay in cash. And this is incredibly important. And we're doing this work to ensure that people in a low-income or disadvantaged communities who often face barriers to accessing digital banking, we're making sure that cash is available for them and available for use. It also allows those without smartphones or reliable internet access or bank accounts to purchase essentials. If a storm hits, if we cut off the power, or power gets cut off, if a bushfire breaks out, and we have to force families to evacuate, telecommunication lines fail, leaving people without access to the banks. Part of this is how do we ensure that those people can still access the essentials they need? And we know in recent years that there are two ways that we can do this. In some instances, cash becomes primary. In other instances, we actually need the capacity for government to pay into people's accounts electronically to ensure that they can do these things. So in a world where we're in transition potentially, I think it's critical that we continue to ensure that members of our community can conduct their business in cash. Currently, there's not a legal requirement for businesses to do that. We're going to work through a consultation process, get the settings right and bring this before the House as soon as is practical to ensure that businesses have clarity about the future, but that we're looking after those people in our communities who want to be able to use cash for their essentials, who deserve to be able to use cash for their essentials, and who should be able to rely on a government to make sure that's possible into the future. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Reserve. Yep.
Reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Okay. The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Cowper.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise on this bill about retaining cash, and I thank the member for Lawler for filing it because I think it's very important. And the member made a very good point in her speech. The people who are most concerned about this are older Australians. They have grown up dealing with cash. It's been easy, it's been reliable. What is not easy and what is not reliable for many of them is technology. They don't have the iPhone that they go and tap on. They're not necessarily across the internet or on NetBank or some other application. And I get emails every single day, and when I walk through the streets, or as I was on the weekend at the Dorrigo show, people raise this issue, Pat, we've got to make sure that we keep cash.
So it's that fear factor for older Australians, and I have over 30% of my electorate are over the age of 65. So it is time that we had that conversation, that we legislate that cash must be able to be used for essential items. And I understand why you can't use cash to go and buy a brand new Mercedes, because the first thing you think about is, organised crime. But essential items, and there is a very good reason behind that. And we've seen that. I'll give you 3 examples, Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I went to Coles recently and there had been a blackout. In that shopping centre they have 2 ATMs. Well, the ATMs didn't work because there was no electricity. The scanners didn't work, and there was a sign out the front, "We accept cash only." Now, if you were an older person, or myself, I didn't have any cash on me, so I got back in the car and went home. Now, these things are going to happen. You're going to have weather events. In the horrible floods that we saw, everything went down. And general supermarkets were saying, "We only accept cash," but you couldn't get the cash out unless you had some at home. So you have to have that backup plan. What I am really concerned about are the banks. And I say it all the time, and I don't mean the people who work in the banks, I'm talking about the banking structure or infrastructure itself, or corporation. They are not our friends. And I wish they'd stop trying to pretend that they're our friends. They are money-making corporations, and they will do what is necessary to increase their fees for their shareholders. And good on you if you've got shareholdings in bank shareholdings in your self-managed super fund, great. But you need to look after the little people. A recent example, Deputy Speaker, a pensioner in my electorate went in and she had $160 in cash and she wanted to deposit it over the counter. They wouldn't take it. They wouldn't take it because of anti-money laundering legislation. This is a little old lady. She didn't look like me, with handlebar moustache and, a Chopper Read lookalike for Movember. They wouldn't take it, and yet they said to her, "There's a machine out the front that you put your cash in, put your card in, and that'll transfer it into your bank account." Well, she didn't know how. And I made the point that these people behind the counters might find that they're going to lose their jobs because of automation. What that person should have done is get up, walk around the counter and say, "Here you go, I'll show you how to do it." But the concept that we are going to lose cash in the future just is beyond the pale. We have to ensure that we have cash in our society as a backup for essential services only, and to ensure that our older Australians are able to rely on that system that they have known for many, many years. Deputy Speaker, I'll make the final point in relation to the anti-money laundering. The concept that drug dealers and crime agencies only deal in cash is in the past. They're dealing in cryptocurrency now. So the argument that we've got to get rid of cash to stop this is a falsehood, and we have to look after our Australian citizens.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Reid.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I'm really pleased to be able to speak on this bill because one of the things that I heard very loud and clearly from the residents of 5 Dock when I door-knocked them about a year ago was how disappointed they were that the branch for the Commonwealth Bank in 5 Dock had been closed. They were disappointed that they weren't going to be able to get their banking services, they weren't going to be able to get access to cash through ATMs, and there was real concern in the community there. And at the time, I wrote to Commonwealth Bank and conveyed the concerns of the residents. Unfortunately, the bank said that they would not be reinstating the branch, but that many of the services were going to be available through Australia Post. And I think this is part of steps that the Commonwealth Bank is taking to close down some of these branches, which I think is really disappointing. One of the things that they failed to do, however, was to provide an ATM in the local community that could service people who needed to get access to cash. And after much campaigning from the local community, we recently were able to get an ATM reinstated in 5 Dock. And I thought at the time that it was going to be well received, but I didn't realise how well received it was. So I have again gone door knocking in 5 Dock, and I happened to door knock the friendliest street in 5 Dock because all the residents were out on Tony's porch the day that I went, and they were chatting to each other. And one of the things that was raised was the fact that an ATM had been reinstated in 5 Dock, and Tony, who is in his late 80s, was particularly keen because he had become reliant on his wonderful neighbour, Jayton, in his 30s, to help him with online banking and having to do much of the payments online. But what Tony really wanted to be able to do was to access cash. And so I was really happy to meet with these residents and celebrate the reinstalment of the ATM in 5 Dock. And I think that small story about the residents in 5 Dock really indicates how important cash is for many people in our community. Whilst, of course, we are moving to more digital payments and online purchasing, for many in the community, cash is still critical for their purchases of essential items. So very pleased that the government has now said that they will be mandating cash for essential items while making sure that there are appropriate exemptions for small businesses. Because it is key that people like Tony and his mates in 5 Dock, that they can still purchase things with cash, especially essential items. And as we move towards more online and digital payment systems, one of the things that is really important here as well is to ensure that there is a mechanism for people to pay for things without it attracting a fee. And I'm really pleased to be able to join my colleague, Jerome Luxall, the member for Bennelong, in pushing a campaign to ensure that there is some form of payment, digital and online, that does not attract a fee. And we're not talking a couple of cents on your coffee in the morning. We are talking about extra dollars when you go and pay for your car rego or to buy a laptop for the kids. It adds up. These fees add up. And there has to be some form of payment that does not attract a fee. So I'm pleased that the RBA is doing an inquiry into these payments to see whether or not there needs to be a fee-free digital and online payment. And I know that the government has said that if the RBA are willing to go down this path, we will also be supporting that with legislation. And this is the important reform that is happening, because we need to be able to pay for things without there either attracting a fee or being really hard to do so by paying for it with cash. And added to that, there is some reform that's happening within the New South Wales government to ensure that renters who have to pay their rent through an online mechanism are also not forced to pay an additional fee on top of that. So this is a really sensible step. It's about ensuring that cash remains in our economy and that there are better and easier forms of payment.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and let me acknowledge the presence in the chamber of the erstwhile member for Kennedy, about to deliver his 977th speech to this Parliament on this occasion about the importance of cash, and acknowledge his 50 years of parliamentary service, including since 1993 as the member for Kennedy, and thank him for what he has done, not just for the people of Kennedy, but indeed this nation. Thank you, Bob. This legislation, this bill, this debate, this motion is important because people should be able to pay for things with cash. And whatever legislation we put before the House as far as finance is concerned and Treasury laws, etc., cash will always be, as for many people, king. And it's of great concern to regional communities that we have so many regional bank closures. We need branches to stay open. We need to have the ability to be able to use cash. And I'm sure the member for Kennedy agrees with that premise. I had a woman in my write to me the other day in my electorate concerned about the phasing out of cheques because people like to hang on to traditional norms of payment. Little known fact, you can go to the supermarket, quite frankly, and pay for your groceries with stamps. They are legal tender, should that be your desire, but you could imagine the looks you would get if you tried that on. And we heard earlier from the member for Cowper about the woman in his electorate who just wanted to cash in $120 worth of cash, $160 worth of cash to be able to get that back, and the difficulty she had doing just that. Business people these days, particularly in a community such as Junee in my electorate, which is 42 kilometres from Junee, they've had a number of bank closures, as has Coolaman, Cootamundra, Cowra, Forbes, Grenfell, Lockhart, Parks, Temora, Wagga Wagga and West Walland. It sounds like a line out of the song I've Been Everywhere Man, but unfortunately I've seen banking closures everywhere, man, and it does have an impact on businesses that accept cash, and all businesses should accept cash. It's just not right that businesses in Australia do not. Some businesses appreciate they've got their own systems, but they should all accept cash. And I was appreciative of the Senate inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia for holding a hearing at Junee on 21 September 2023. And Junee has suffered from several bank closures in recent years, including having 4 banks once upon a time, probably even more way back in the day. But 3 of those 4 banks in more modern times are now closed. Only the Commonwealth Bank remains. And it was important for the inquiry to hear the concerns of local residents, particularly the then Mayor, Mayor Neil Smith, and I know the current Mayor, Bob Callow, shares the same concerns. The Commonwealth Bank at least has put its plan to close the branch on hold and committed to maintaining all of its regional branches in Australia until the end of 2026. And I say that's good. Not before time, because many of these banks have done very nicely, thank you very much, out of country people, particularly out of our farmers who've had big holdings, and the banks have had the ability to be able to use that money on the International Monetary Exchange and been able to lend to customers and been able to do all their banking services on the back of regional Australia, providing the confidence and the investment in those banks. And then when the foot traffic suddenly isn't what it used to be, then all of a sudden the banks say, well, hang on a minute, why do we need to keep that branch open? Well, not everybody has an iPhone, believe it or not. Not everybody wants to do their banking on an iPhone, on a laptop, on an iPad or on a computer. Some people like to use cash. Some people like to go into bank branches, and it's incumbent upon these bank branches, which have done very nicely, thank you very much, out of regional Australia, to keep those branches open. And I'm pleased that Senate inquiry heard the evidence. I'm pleased that the Commonwealth Bank has got a stay of execution on some of their bank closures. And I would urge and encourage banks to remain open in country Australia. I would urge and encourage the government to do everything it can to make sure that Australians can continue to pay for cash for essential items if they want to, as this motion says, while also ensuring an orderly transition. It says to phase out cheques. Well, hang on a minute. We need cheques still in Australia. It's important. That's one part of the bill I do not agree with. Not one part of this item that I do not agree with, but cash does need to remain in service for as long as we care to think about.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak in support of this motion, a very important motion and a long time coming. As we just heard the member for Riverina and previously the good member of Northern Queensland talk about the importance of cash. It is important. Many people still use cash. Many of us, fine, we are fairly IT savvy and can do things quite easily on the computer and transfer money and pay bills, etc. But for the majority of Australians, many, especially elderly and pensioners, people still rely on cash. It is important that we have cash within our society, and it's important that people have access to cash to be able to go in and pay cash as their right if they feel like it. Now, I think banks for a number of years now have been continuously making it harder and harder to either access cash, to accept cash, or to pay with cash. And they do so because it means less staff counting money and being tellers in branches, and therefore reducing their costs. And if you have a look at the profits they make, we all know that they are billions and billions of dollars, and rightly so. They are a business, they've got shareholders, but at the same time they have a responsibility to our society. They have a responsibility to our pensioners, they have a responsibility to people who perhaps for whatever reason don't have a smartphone, or for whatever reason just that right to pay in cash. Now, Deputy Speaker, we've seen branches close. We've seen ATM machines pulled out of walls and finding them harder to find. Just my own branch in where I live has closed my own bank has closed 3 branches in the last 18 months. And I'm finding it harder when I actually have to go in to physically do something to find a branch to go in and talk to. The other day I decided to go to the head office in King William Street in Adelaide because I thought surely someone there will be able to assist with this issue that I had. And I was told they couldn't because they don't have any tellers. They don't have any tellers, just desks, service officers. So it just gives you an example where banks are trying to take us to and what the public wants. Recently I was contacted by a constituent of mine whom I wrote to the Treasurer on behalf and told him about the importance of cash, and I'm pleased that he has listened and is going down this track. Mary informed me, who has a Baker's Delight in one of the biggest shopping centres in South Australia. She deals with a lot of cash. People come in, they buy a coffee, a sandwich. A lot of pensioners use her coffee shop. Recently, she went to the bank to deposit the takings of the day and to take out the cash flow for the next day, and was told she could not have any cash flow because they have stopped that service. She then had to ask around within the same shopping centre the other banks, who all said, yes, we'll give you cash, but you're not a client of this particular bank. You have to sign up with us. You can imagine the rigmarole that would go with taking all her mortgages, all her payments, everything to a new bank. She then went back to her branch in the shopping centre, and she was informed there was a particular branch of the same bank 7 kilometres away. She now has to make that trip 7 kilometres every day back and forth to access some cash, which she needs. It is vital to her business. It's not a luxury. It is vital to her business to be able to give out change. She was recently informed that that service has stopped as well at this other shopping centre that she travelled to. So she's now looking around to see where else she can access cash for her business, for the people that pay cash and need change. You can see how important it is. Deputy Speaker, coincidentally this morning, one of my staffers took his son to a concert and took a friend of that son to a concert at the entertainment centre, where they went to line up to get some food during the concert, and were told that only cards would be accepted, not cash. Now, this kid was lucky that he was with a family friend who paid for it, and then they gave him the money. But this was a young kid that turned up, cash from his parents, to buy something to eat at this concert, and was told we can't accept it. I think that's not on. I think we need to ensure that cash is available, that cash remains as part of our society, and people should have a choice. We all have a choice. If you want to do it electronically, you can. If you want to pay cash, you can. But the reality of this is, sure, it makes our lives simpler in many cases when we do it all electronically, but the real reality is that banks are shying away from their responsibilities, and that is to service the Australian public, and that is to ensure that they offer banking services.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Kennedy.
Madam Speaker, this issue was touched off by an altercation that I had with the cafeteria in Parliament House, and I produced cash, and the lady said, we don't take cash, and I'm sorry, you have to take cash because it's legal tender. Now, when the original legislation was introduced providing for legal tender and for the Australian printery, to be able to print money. It was really very clear cut in the legislation that it was to be legal tender. That meant that you had a debt because you ordered an ice cream and they gave you the ice cream, and they had to take the money that was produced by the government for that purpose. Now, for the banks to arrogate that power to themselves and take it off the Australian people, I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. I'm reading, and I would recommend for every person in this parliament to read the Qantas Lounge and just see how much powerful people can manipulate for their benefit and the detriment of the public, their misuse of power. And it most certainly has occurred in the case of the banks. Australia had the worst depression of any country on earth, and I'm not going to go into all the figures, but Germany went to 32% unemployment, but we went to 32% unemployment and stayed there, because some imbecile decided that the government shouldn't produce money. Well, government don't produce money. You have a depression. But there was already a depression, and it was made infinitely worse by the government not producing money. Now, I don't want to get too complicated with economics here, but it is very simple that there is a myriad of cases given by the honourable member on my right and on my left, myriads of cases where it is required that you take cash. But let me give you two small cases. They had the Quamby races, which attracts a couple of thousand people, and some glitch in the system meant that they had no internet service. So, I mean, how can you have a rodeo with 2,000 people to feed? And they had not made a provision for taking cash. So a wonderful day was completely wrecked. Infinitely more importantly is if the bank is giving you great trouble, you have an ability to be able to withdraw the cash and get away before they come after you with an axe. But infinitely more importantly than that, don't you realise that if you don't have cash, then the bank, you'll have to get permission off the bank to buy a loaf of bread. And the interesting thing for me, all the speakers emphasise elderly people wanting to use cash. Well, you know, it's been funny, but after it, you get a lot of people, you know, on the internet, young, but they were young people. They come up and said, "Cash, brother, cash," and they'll, you know, thump me on the arm, "Cash, brother, cash." Well, young people understood the necessity to have cash. But, you know, the hide of people, powerful people in society, saying, "No, I will have control of what you spend your money on. I am the banks." Well, look at your record in Australia. Banks, I mean, it has been absolutely appalling. The GFC, the Great Depression, 100 examples I could give you. But it is very simple. If there's no cash, then you have to get permission off the banks to buy a loaf of bread. Think about that. Think about that. So we applaud the government for moving on this. Very seldom do I see a government, you know, where we pulled a little stunt. Well, we didn't pull a little stunt. I just wanted to pay by cash. And I paid great tribute to Milton Dick, who found out about the altercation and confrontation and came racing down and put his foot down very unequivocally that you will take cash.
The member's time has expired. The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. I call the clerk.
Private members' business. Order of the day number 1, resumption of debate on the motion relating to rural, remote and regional health.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Parks.
Yeah, I speak on the motion, it was Dr Webster's motion, on rural and regional and remote health. And this is most appropriate, that it's one of the constant issues that come to my 3 offices in Western New South Wales is issues around the vacancies and the need for more health professionals. And I might just reflect on some of the things, I might just say, over the years, and I've been here, as of yesterday, 17 years since I was elected, a member for Blair, same day we turned up, and there's been attempts, there's always looking for a silver bullet, the quick answer to fix these problems. And with regards to health, we've actually made it considerably worse. The idea of paying health professionals, whether they're doctors, allied health or nurses, considerably more to go and work as a locum has actually mean that is now been a pathway for people to choose as a career. And I asked the question, why would someone choose to go and hang up their shingle and work for 40 or 50 years as a local GP when they can fly in and fly out and earn considerably more money? The problem with that is that the standard of health is much lower. It doesn't matter how qualified that person is. Health is all about relationships. It's all about having a person that you know and can trust, and having those critical life moments of discussion, end-of-life care, aged care, all of those things. And so in an attempt to do that, I could point to the time when I was a regional health minister and working with the then Rural Health Commissioner, Professor Ruth Stewart. We worked with ACRM and considerably increased the numbers of training places for the generalist pathway. So part of the problem was that general practitioners were getting trained in specific area, but they didn't have the qualifications to go into a rural area where they may have needed to have more skills in emergency, but also another skill like anaesthetics or obstetrics or something that could benefit a broader range. And so there was a reluctance to go out, but we are seeing now, and with the number of training places and changing the John Flynn program from being a student experience to actually putting that money into more actual training places in regional areas, has significantly given more people that opportunity to train in a regional area. And we've also had a generalist training program now for allied health, so that they can actually have a broader range. But it makes a difference, decisions. And I've got to say, when this government came in and they changed the rules around the distribution priority area, just so the people know, those that live in the peri-urban areas, that week, my electorate lost 6 doctors. 6 doctors from the most underprivileged, needy communities in Western New South Wales, when that distribution priority area changed, and it was done for a reason. That was put in place so that doctors that had obligations to meet as part of their qualification to work in Australia would go to certain areas. So 6 doctors went to less underprivileged areas, to peri-urban areas, to areas on the coast. And that has been, that issue in itself has been overhanging regional areas. So I just want to leave the message to this place that decisions here matter. And while everyone thinks they live in the most disadvantaged part of Australia, even people who live in the capital cities talk about their need for more doctors, that's fine. But don't take them from Western New South Wales, where the need is the greatest. I commend Dr Webster on her motion and understand that regional health is very important.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on this motion from the member for Mallee and acknowledge the importance of this issue in my electorate. The Albanese Labor government's put forward a range of measures to address health workforce shortages and improve the health outcomes for people living in rural, remote and regional Australia, including in my regional electorate of Blair, which takes in the rural parts of Ipswich and the Somerset region. At the outset, the government funds more than $1.9 billion a year for programs to develop the workforce and support a more equitable distribution of health professionals to areas of need, especially regional and rural areas. In our first budget, we put in place a range of increased incentives for doctors to practice in rural and remote communities, like the members who's bringing this motion to the community. It's very significant and reward doctors moving to regional Australia with the skills they need. We've already seen the benefits of this investment with a significant increase in the number of junior doctors commencing as GP trainees in 2024. In fact, the last 2 years have seen the biggest increase in doctor numbers in a decade. We've also seen extra training places from an oversubscribed rural generalist training scheme that's building our rural workforce. Now, that's not fixing every problem in every single community, but more doctors, more bulk billing, more Medicare urgent care clinics and more Medicare mental health centres, like in my community, are starting to turn around the challenges that we inherited from the coalition, who saw bulk billing go into freefall. We know there are a range of levers we need to pull, and we're doing so. For example, in the education portfolio, we put in place some very significant HECS or help debt relief for medical and nursing graduates who move to regional Australia. We put in place a number of single employer model trials to try and deal with the industrialised disadvantage that GP registrars face in regional communities compared to their hospital-based counterparts as well. And the $3.5 billion investment put in place 12 months ago to triple the bulk billing incentive is benefiting regional Australia more than our cities. We know that about 40% of the more than 5 million additional free visits to a doctor that took place over the last 12 months happened in regional Australia. Now, Australians living in regional, rural and remote areas will benefit from the $213.6 million package in the 2024-25 budget that's delivering cheaper medicines, more access to scans and other tests and more free mental health services and investments in the health workforce. But I acknowledge it's an ongoing challenge in my community. In August last year, I held a roundtable on regional health in Fernvale in the Somerset region in my electorate with the Assistant Minister for Rural and Regional Health. It was attended by a number of the participants from a range of professional bodies, service providers and local community groups, including Services for Australia, Rural and Remote Allied Health, SARA, which the member referred to in her motion. A key focus of the forum was allied health workforce shortages and services access issues, which have a real impact on people living in the Somerset region. One of the things we discussed was that the government had just announced a health workforce review to address these issues and to ensure we optimise our health professionals, including allied health professionals, in regional, rural and remote areas. That review recently concluded, and the government's now carefully considering its recommendations along with other primary health care and workforce reviews, and we look forward to seeing the outcome of that. Certainly as a regional MP, I've been advocating for better healthcare services in my electorate. I'm pleased to say that we delivered a Medicare urgent care clinic and a Head to Health or Medicare mental health centre in Ipswich, and these proved to be very popular and making a real difference for patients in Blair, including people in the rural areas who come in to Ipswich to access these services. Just recently, the Minister for Health and Aged Care and I visited both facilities and heard the Ipswich Urgent Care Clinic has had 11,000 presentations since it opened in August last year, while the Medicare Mental Health Centre has 1,660 appointments since it opened in May. I want to thank Dr Ajit Bahala and the 4Health team at the Urgent Care Clinic and the Open Minds team at the Mental Health Centre for their outstanding work in boosting bulk billing health service in Ipswich. Also, the Minister met with Tony Bayliss and his partner and wife, Dr Kath Bayliss, at the Colleges Crossing Family Practice, and Tony's the chair of the Darling-Downs Westmoreton PHN and Kath is the Queensland chair of the RAC GP Queensland. They talked about the issues in regional and rural areas, and I'm pleased that we've got great practitioners across my electorate who contribute in this way.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Fisher.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Regional communities like mine are in a healthcare crisis, and Australians have had a gutful of this Labor government's cuts and clumsy mismanagement of the healthcare sector. Over a quarter of the Australian population lives in regional, rural or remote Australia, and nearly a quarter of those Australians are over 65 years of age, when we all know that people require more health care. They are more likely to need access to acute, critical and or long-term health care, as well as aged care, disability and practical support. Despite this demand on their services, communities like mine have a dire shortage of general practitioners and primary health care workers. High turnover, skyrocketing costs and poor infrastructure and connectivity means that GPs can't afford to practice, they can't afford to set up a clinic or keep their doors open. And we know this all too well in Fisher. Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot tell you the number of emails and phone calls that I've received from GPs that are screaming out for help, that are screaming out for more doctors because they are overworked and, quite frankly, they are at the end of their tether. Since my election in 2016, I've stood shoulder to shoulder with the Fisher community in the fight for better healthcare infrastructure. I fought for mental health care services, and I remain committed to establishing the Sunshine Coast as a mental health care hub. To that end, I've delivered $4 million to set up a headspace in Caloundra, which is now 18 months long overdue, but for the continued hassling and pressuring of this government, they're only just now starting to open or talk about opening next month, which is going to be 18 months late. I've secured $8.3 million to establish the National PTSD Centre in Batinia, Australia's first PTSD research centre. I've secured $11.4 million to set up and fund youth mental health and suicide prevention work through the University of the Sunshine Coast Thompson Institute, alongside Roy and Nola Thompson. I've secured $7.3 million to set up and operate Australia's first residential eating disorder facility at Wandi Nerida. And I've also secured funding for eating disorder recovery coaches, youth mental health events, men's sheds, veterans' wellbeing and psychosocial care. And now in opposition, I'm fighting for Fisher families to access the health care services we need. I spoke up for the community of Montville, who desperately needed a doctor. Hundreds of hinterland locals signed my Montville Needs a Doctor petition, calling for the government to reconsider the funding model they apply to GP funding. Our petition and requests fell on deaf ears of this Labor government. We stood up to Labor's reckless attack on community pharmacies. Labor's botched changes to dispensing, discounting arrangements and reckless red tape pushed community pharmacies to the brink. In Fisher, the uncertainty and skyrocketing costs drove some doors to close. As the Shadow Assistant Minister and member for Mallee said so well when she said, Labor's scorched earth approach to regional Australia has left some regional towns with their pharmacist as their sole primary healthcare provider. That is, if they still have a pharmacy. Thankfully, alongside community pharmacies, the Coalition fought to negotiate a new 8th community pharmacy agreement with the government. But as always, the Coalition has a plan to remedy Labor's regional health crisis. We will invest $400 million to incentivise and equip the next generation of GPs for regional communities. We'll slash the red tape and cut the taxes which are crippling healthcare providers. We'll restore the telehealth system which Labor has sought to dismantle. And we will once again double the number of psychologist visits available under Medicare. That was one of the first things this health minister did, was dismantle the number of visits that a person could go and see a psychologist. That was this Labor government that cut the funding for people who are at their most vulnerable, people who need to go and see a psychologist. The health minister cut that funding shamefully, disgracefully. That meant that tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of Australians could not access appropriate
psychologist visits, and we will fix that when we win government, God willing, and if the Australian community support us next year.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for Mallee for moving this important motion. Health, as you know, is a topic close to my heart, and I'm indeed interested in pathways for more generalist doctors, because I too was a generalist doctor. I worked as a medical doctor specialising in general medicine. I was essentially what is called a specialist generalist, which means, like GPs, throughout this country, I saw everything that came through the door, and I mean everything. I too have had the privilege during my training and my career to work in many, many regional towns throughout this country. From Rocky to Armidale, Warrnambool, Orange, Coffs Harbour, Lismore, Rockingham, Bunbury, Burnie, I could go on and on and on. But every major hospital that I have ended up working in the metropolitan areas has always had deep connections into rural and regional communities, because these were our referral pathways. And we were there also to take on calls and support our GPs in those regions, as well as the few specialist doctors that were out there. I've got to say, it is an enduring regret of mine that I didn't end up in rural or regional medicine, because I really loved it when I was a trainee doctor and a medical student. And I think what happened was I just ended up getting seduced by metropolitan, big hospital, frenetic medicine, and I really wasn't deliberative enough when I was making the decision about where to train, what to specialise in. And I didn't really have any mentors at the time who actually could point me in the right direction. The time I did spend in regional communities was incredibly rewarding. It was like nothing I've ever experienced in the city, and I do mean that. You were stopped at supermarkets, at the church, people were caring, they were grateful to have a medical student or a doctor working in their town, and they were interested in your well-being. I still remember a GP I worked with who provided a bike to help me get from my accommodation to the practice, and everyone in the clinic knew that I had this bicycle, and they were wondering whether it was okay and did I need anything more. The medicine was rewarding, but the gratitude that came in bucket loads, and it was genuine. So what are we doing to support our rural and regional communities? By and far, patients want to see a doctor, and they would like to have a bulk bill doctor. To that end, we are opening urgent care clinics right around the country. We have already opened 78, with more to come. And some of these are in regional towns, such as Albury, Shepparton, Bendigo, Ballarat, Rocky, Broome, Mount Gambier, Tamworth, Toowoomba, Ali Currung in the Northern Territory, Bunbury and Dapto in New South Wales. We have invested $1.9 billion in programs to really boost the workforce, and this is already yielding benefits. Last year, we saw an uplift in the number of people registering to practice as doctors, new doctors. So in 2022-23, there were 8,356. In 23-24, that number has gone up to 9,490. Moreover, we're seeing an increase, a 25% uplift in the number of doctors who want to become GPs. And that is, news to shout from the rooftops. We had 1,504 junior doctors trained as GPs, and in 2025, we've seen an increase of nearly 250 on top of that, which is fantastic. In addition, we're seeing more of those doctors actually spend more time now in regional areas. So half of those junior doctors who are going through the GP training program will actually spend at least 12 months in the region, so that they can get a taste of what I had back in the day. In addition, we have reduced help debt or waived it entirely for GP registrars, meaning trainees who go into general practice and work in the regions, as well as for nurse practitioners. And the further out you go, the more remote, in other words, the more debt we will waive. So in some circumstances, the Commonwealth will actually pay 100% of your help debt, which could be up to $70,000 for a doctor and $20,000 for a nurse practitioner. So that is really, really good news. We've also seen an uplift in the amount of bulk billing throughout the country, but particularly in the regions. Now, as you know, in our first budget, second budget actually, we tripled the bulk billing incentive, and that has actually translated to an additional 2.2 million visits to the GP that have been bulk billed. And that is happening right across the country, with people in the regions actually the highest beneficiaries. Now, we know that there's more to do, but we are focused on really strengthening Medicare, which is the backbone of the healthcare system.
The question is that motion be agreed to. I call the member for Cowper.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for Mallee for bringing on this motion about the lack or the crisis of rural, remote and regional health. Deputy Speaker, my father was a GP in Kempsey for 30-odd years, and one of the biggest kicks I get out of this job is when people come up and say to me, well, for example, at the markets on Saturday at Port Macquarie, come up and say to me, your dad delivered my 3 kids, or I had a motorbike accident. This actually happened last weekend. I had a motorbike accident when I was 19. I was in a coma for 6 weeks, and your dad saved my life and he looked after me for many, many months after that. I'm very proud of that fact. But it talks about, it really is reflective of the fact that long ago, doctors went to the regions and they stayed in the regions. And right now there are fewer doctors than there were in the 70s and 80s in my hometown of Kempsey than there is right now. And that's the problem we face, not just with specialist generalist GPs, but with healthcare across the board, occupational therapy, speech therapy. You can't make a GP go to the country. You can't push them out there. You can't force them and say, if you're going to be a GP and graduate through university after 6, 8, 10 years, you've got to go to the country. That's not fair on them. People need to make that decision as to what their future looks like. But we can certainly put things in place to incentivise our young people who are putting basically their life on hold to get through their medical degree. My nephew's doing one out at Wagga Wagga right now. But we know that if people study in the regions, they settle in the regions. Generally, they might meet a boyfriend or a girlfriend and they're spending time there and they decide to settle there. So we need to build up that relationship with our universities to get our young people into regional and rural programs or degrees, so they go to the country, they go to regional and rural areas, they study and they stay. The other thing we can do is incentivise to get those people out into the country. Now, whether that's through tax concessions, whether that's helping them with housing, which is a huge problem at the moment. It's all well and good to have somebody come to the region.
Division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division, and the proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. Question is that motion be agreed to. I call the member for Cowper in continuation.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I was in the throes of talking about incentivising general specialists as well as allied health professionals into the region. And I do note the Coalition's work with the National Rural Generalist Pathway back in 2017, but the Coalition have committed to $400 million to incentivise rural and regional practitioners. We also need to restore the telehealth. Now, in the absence of those practitioners, the second best practice is telehealth, and to see cuts in this area is disappointing. But we do need that backup system in the absence of having people on the ground. In finishing up, Deputy Speaker, I do want to highlight two of the government's policies that have seriously affected regional Australia. The first one is to change the distribution priority area. And for those of you who don't know, that allowed overseas doctors to practice in the regions to ensure that we filled that void where it was needed. Unfortunately, Labor changed that to include peri-urban areas, and in my electorate alone, I've heard that we've lost 4 doctors. The member for Parkes, he said he lost 6 doctors, and that is across Australia. Those doctors moved from regional and remote areas because they could, because of the changes that Labor made. It made it more difficult to access services in the regions. The second one was reducing visits covered by Medicare for mental health issues from 20 to 10, and we have committed that we will restore those visits back to 20 when we get back into government next term. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that motion be agreed to. I call the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are more likely to live in urban and regional areas. The proportion of First Nation people living outside these centres increases with remoteness. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people make up just 1.9% of people living in major cities, but 32% in remote and very remote areas of Australia. Access to quality healthcare shouldn't be dependent on where you live. My electorate of Lingiari includes all of the Northern Territory's regional and remote Aboriginal communities, making up around 61,000 people and representing 26.3% of the Northern Territory's population. A priority for me is increasing access to culturally safe and appropriate healthcare for all constituents in my electorate that is delivered in true partnership with local people and communities. These partnerships not only build a stronger health system for rural, remote and regional Australia, importantly they ensure this system is equipped to better meet the complex and multi-layered health challenges facing people living in these locations. A good example of effective partnership at work is in the rollout of the Medicare urgent care clinics across Australia. The Albanese Labor government is increasing the number of Medicare urgent clinics, including 6 new clinics announced for remote regions in my electorate. These 6 new clinics will be at Alikarung, Gallowinku, Aliangula, Wurrumiunga, Lajamanu and Maningrida, very remote communities but big populations. In addition to the 2 new clinics already established in Palmerston and the regional town of Alice Springs or Mbatwa, which is been ranked #1 in terms of visitation and usage by any urgent care clinic. These locations of these remote clinics were chosen in partnership with the Northern Territory Department of Health and the Aboriginal Medical Service Alliance of the Northern Territory. Their involvement ensured these clinics are best placed to meet the priority needs of remote Aboriginal communities. The new clinics are also being adapted to local circumstances and will operate differently from other Medicare urgent care clinics in Australia. Innovative workforce models are being designed and new service delivery approaches are being developed to help reduce the number of area medical retrievals from these communities. And if anyone has the cost of air evacuations out of these communities can go in excess of $50,000 just for one emergency evac out of one of those communities. This will ease the burden on existing primary healthcare services. There's also a number of dialysis units in remote and very remote communities, which will allow a lot of Aboriginal people to stay closer to home and be treated on country. And 4 communities in my electorate have been invited to apply for grants under Labor's $73.2 million investment in better renal services for First Nation people. These communities were chosen based on the number of people requiring dialysis and their distances from existing services. These dialysis units, and I have to applaud our Federal Minister for the Environment, where she has put substantial investment towards stable and reliable water supply services in these communities so that these renal dialysis machines can operate effectively. If we can keep people on country, it means that their families will stay and be part of their broader health care and treatment. So Labor's investment in better water security under the National Water Grid Fund will ensure good quality water, which most of us take for granted, can be available in remote First Nation communities, which is vital for dialysis treatments. Better renal services is about increasing access to life-saving dialysis treatment for First Nation communities in remote communities. It just shows true partnerships between 2 federal government programs is a very practical example of working in tandem to close the gap for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by improving the livability of remote and very remote communities through safe, secure and reliable water that supports better health and wellbeing outcomes.
The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. The Federation Chamber will now suspend until 4 p.m.